Full coverage, 24 hours versus, they were going back in at 2 and you get called out between 2 and 6. So they changed all that and that happened, believe it or not, over Labor Day. So the end result was 2 people covered the interstate. That's insane. After midnight. On the holiday week. Yeah.
We had at one point 24 troopers in Aroostook County, down to 14.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And in that same time period, we've gone from 6 deputies on the road to 16. You have to make it up somehow, right?
All right. Yeah, it's already quite a lot. Want this shot?
Yes.
If no one else is
please,
coming,
which is
sure.
fine. Everybody is here and accounted for.
All right,
Everyone who's not here is online.
better than being out of line. All right, well, good afternoon. Let's call this meeting of the Abandoned and Discontinued Roads Commission on September 12th to order. Could we please have a roll call?
Carla Black. Present. Brian Bronson.
Present.
Peter Coughlin.
Here.
Rebecca Graham.
Here on Zoom.
No, I think the owl was turned down again.
Oh.
We're having owl problems.
You said you want me to go under?
Oh,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
I'll go under and hand it to you.
Did we have someone from
I should
Department of
check
Fisheries
it.
and Wildlife here?
How do you?
I think
It's a little plus,
isn't
at
it?
the bottom, there's like a plus and a minus.
Yeah.
I don't know on the side.
Right there on the side.
Is that helping?
Can you hear me now?
Okay,
Now I go under, I guess.
thank
No,
you
no, no.
so much. Jim Katsiafikis.
Here,
And Chris McCabe is out. Roberta Mantor. Here. Vivian McHale. Here. John Monk.
Here on Zoom.
Ryan Pelletier.
Here.
Steve Young.
Here on Zoom.
Oh,
all right, well, good afternoon. We have a, can you all hear?
Somebody's mic
Okay.
on.
All right, first off, adoption of minutes. Everyone's had a chance to take a look at the proposed minutes for the March 24th meeting. Remember that one? And the August 3rd meeting. Could we have a motion? Let's just do them sequentially. March 24th, is there a motion to approve?
So
Okay, second,
Second,
All in favor, and I guess we have to do a roll call vote, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Carla Black,
Yes.
Brian Bronson.
yes.
Peter Coughlin,
Yes.
Rebecca Graham,
Yes.
Jim Katsioukas.
Yes,
Chris is out. Roberta Mantor,
Yes.
Vivian McHale,
Yes.
John Monk,
Yes.
Catherine Nadeau is out, Ryan Pelletier,
Yes.
Steve Young.
Yes.
all right. With that, how about the August 3rd minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Okay, yeah,
Carla Black,
Yes.
Brian Bronson,
Yes,
Peter Coughlin,
Yes.
Rebecca Graham,
Yes.
Katsioukas.
yes,
Chris is out, Roberta Mantor,
Yes.
Vivian McHale,
Yes.
John Monk,
Yes.
Catherine Nadeau is out, Ryan Pelletier,
Yes.
Steve Young.
Yes.
all right. One of the issues that's taken a fair amount of time, and it's been something we've all been working on, and some of us more than others since the inception of this commission, is a website. And so Heather has been doing some great work getting that established. We'll take a look at the website.
I think I have to share my screen so those that are online can see, so. So I think you guys can all see the website, those of you who are online now. Yes, okay, good. So this is what it looks like. As you can see, it has the report. It will have upcoming meetings. It has the legislative act. It has the public map view. It has the list of the commissioners, has the meetings. It has, I'm sorry, I know they're little faces. Okay, it has, please contact us so I can add people to listserv. At the bottom, it has the address where they can send mail, our email address and our YouTube account, so they can watch any and all videos that are posted. And I'm going to go through training so I can learn how to update and do things that I need to do to the webpage, apparently.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yes.
It's excellent work.
we actually have.
So
So is this online now or?
Nope, I needed you guys to approve it first before I go through and let it be online, so.
Do we have a motion to approve the website?
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Do you want me-
Do you want some more comments first before we actually vote, or are we okay?
It looks like a lot of hands are being raised, so it looks like a lot of people are happy. I see Steve's raised his hand, John's raised his hand. Rebecca, is it good for you?
Yes, I was trying to get my screen smaller so I could find my hand.
All right, good. Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
We're all
Alright.
good.
Awesome. I'll let them know to put that online then.
Thank you very, very much for pushing this
When
forward.
that goes out, you'll send us the link.
I will send you the link, absolutely.
That way we can forward it to the whole
Yep.
world.
Yep.
Put it on the main roadways page.
Big print. You know, it's so exciting.
Mhm. Guess we'll be notified when it goes live.
It's for free. We.
Yes.
Deal in the end. that was
So there's a,
$5,000 a month.
no, so there's a whole process they go through for commissions that are not funded. Apparently, it's a well-known secret. Even OIT doesn't know this.
oh, geez.
So I had a couple friends who run smaller commissions who told me about it. And so I went through Tyler Tacker Inform Me and said, hey, we have absolutely no money. And here's what the legislature gave us. So they had to do meetings and stuff and prepare and ask what we wanted. So it's only that first page. And she said to me, she's like, well, if you want to add tabs and you want to build on more, she's like, we'll train you so you can do that. So that's supposedly the next
It's
step.
great. I mean, because we've been getting the, the pushback. So just getting something that's really
Just having that connection point where you
Yeah.
can find
huge.
materials and links to places.
I think so
It's
too.
fantastic. No, that's great. I think it's funny. I mean, we went to the head of OIT.
I
It's
know.
not like we didn't try.
I know. I had to call them back and be like, so, and they're like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, are you sure? Because all these, I started listing the people I knew and they're like, and they checked it out and they're like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm like, thank you.
So you said that it will allow people to sign on the listserv?
Yes,
So
it will
that's
when it goes live.
fantastic.
Yeah, it'll send an email to me and I'll be able to add them. I will create a listserv of everybody so that they'll all get like meetings and stuff. And
So
upcoming
so anybody
events.
who wants to be kept abreast of what's happening, they just get on that list and
Yep.
you notify them when the meetings are.
Yes,
Super, then I don't have to let them know.
yeah, absolutely.
One
Hopefully
less thing you have
everybody's
to
here.
do.
Yeah,
Okay,
And they can be sure that they actually get notified because lots of times I get so busy, I don't get the notice out.
Yeah.
This way they'll get
yeah, that'll be my job.
it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
right. Well, that moves us to the next point, which is the subcommittees. A little reminder, stepping back, what it is we're supposed to be doing. The legislature has asked us to review the use of the following terms in the main revised statutes: private way, private road, and public easements. Those are the 4 terms in particular that the legislature has asked us to take a look at and see if there are any recommendations we make as to how those are defined, how those are used, where they appear in the statutes. At the same time, we also had a report earlier this year that the legislature had asked us to put together with some priorities for changes that we thought might be effective, might be helpful in regard to main road law. So because of that, we established 2 subcommittees, one to look at the terms, as LD 461 told us to do, and the other to look at the priorities that the legislature last time had asked us to take a look at and establish. So we could have flipped a coin, something we put the terms committee went on first. But I'd like to just go through that. We're not going to solve these problems today. We're going to just be getting some feedback from the committees and comments from commission members on what those committees have been doing. And the committees will continue. So this is just like a check-in basically as to what we've done so far, get comments and input, and then we'll keep moving that so that the next meeting we can get closer and closer to the idea of actually having a report that we can submit to the legislature for our deadline for January 5, 2024, which will be here before we know it, right? Unfortunately, it's probably true. So let's start then with the terms subcommittee, and Pete Coughlin was looking at public way and also some related terms. You have some materials in your agenda that are related to what Pete had looked at, but primarily, Pete, I think you were looking at you had put together a matrix which lists which title and which section of state law these appear, and then the particular comments on those particular provisions. You've got one for public way, and then also another for public roadway or street or highway or state or highway, and way and townway as these are used in the statute. So Pete, I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Whereas the other ones are on public easement and then private issues. So I think all of us probably did our best to try to find where these existed in the statute. And I'm saying right now, I'm not 100% sure that I got them all, but this is the bulk of them. So let's look at the one that says way and townway. And by the way, the 3 of us all tried to put these in the same format in these little tables here. So when it gets to Jim and Roberti, it should see the same sort of thing. So under ways and townways, I found 3 places in the law that use those terms. And if I may, and I don't know if you want us to do, Jim, I was going to comment on what I found and whether it should stay, whether it should go, or whether it should be combined with something else. In other words, a place that we could eliminate some confusion or discrepancies.
I think it's important for, each person who handled a particular term or set of terms to explain where you think the problems are.
Okay.
And then the committee members will respond.
All right. So underway, I found way 3 times, one being just way, one being townway. Actually, that was it, those 2 terms. Way, as you can see here, as defined in the motor vehicle statute, as opposed to townway, which is in the Title 23 transportation statute. Way means the entire width between boundary lines of a road, a highway, a parkway, a street or bridge used for vehicular traffic, whether public or private. So this is a very broad term. And I did look up, and there is a definition in that same section of 29A 101 for vehicle, because I wanted to know what vehicular traffic really meant. And vehicle is basically anything that is not human power or used exclusively on railroad tracks or snowmobiles. So it's basically a motor vehicle. So this is a broad term. It's very simple, obviously, just the word way. It's public or private. It's something that someone could drive on. To me, I think it is fine as is, because there's a couple other statutes that relate back to this. And this is about as basic as you can get. It's just a way, public or private.
What about ATV traffic on that, in that situation?
So that goes back to vehicle, the definition of vehicle, which, let me just read the definition of that. It means a device for conveyance of persons or property on a way. Vehicle does not include conveyances propelled or drawn by human power or used exclusively on railroad tracks or snowmobiles, or an electric personal assistive mobility device.
So it would include 18.
Yeah. So I just looking at this, and I've used this for years, a way is either public or private. It's just something that someone could take a vehicle on. When it comes to townways, that is in Title 23. And you can see the definitions there, that this has been in the statutes for a long time. Actually back to 1981. And I personally didn't think there was a whole lot of issues with the way that is defined. Because it relates to what happened before 1976. It talks about reclassification things after 82. And Part A being held by a municipality for general use by the public. So other than the fact that it's 42 years old, I didn't find any particular problem with that or conflicts with other places. So that's all I had for way and townway. The next one I did was public way. And you can see there are 6 places there that use that term in the law. And looking down the left column, you can see it's in the motor vehicle law, it's in the transportation law, it's in the public safety law, the taxation law, Department of Corrections, and DHHS. So just each one of these quickly, again, as 29A motor vehicle definitions. Publicly, a way owned or maintained by the state, the county, or a town over which the general public has a right to pass. I don't have any problem with that. A public way is indeed that. The transportation Title 23 one, it says any road capable of carrying motor vehicles, including but not limited to any state highway, municipal road, which there's a term right there, municipal road, which I suppose you could put back to a town way, county road, an unincorporated territory road, or other road dedicated to the public. I'm okay with that, but I'm thinking there could be a merging with the above one so that we have one definition of public way that's in motor vehicle and transportation law. It's okay as is separately. They both say the same thing, but why not combine them so one references the other? The next 4, to me, really don't really relate to what we talk about as a public way. So when you look under public safety, It's basically all the roads and driveways around where we're sitting right here in Augusta. It's anything on the state capital area. So when we go out of here, we go across the parking lot. We're on a public way because it belongs to the state of Maine in the capital of Augusta on state government property. Why does that have to be a public way? Yeah, I get it. I can see why they did that because it belongs to the public, but why not call it something else like state property, or just get the public way out of the terminology? Under the taxation one, it simply refers back to the very first definition up the top 101. So that's good. I like when it refers from one to another. But the next two corrections is the same one as the public safety one. It's simply the driveways of the roads around the correctional facilities in the state of Maine. So if you go to Charleston or whatever, you're on a public way driving around the jail up there. It's like, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And same with DHHS. It's anything around the state institutions around under the jurisdiction of DHHS. So those three right there, to me, we could eliminate the term public way and call it something else like state property roads or something like that. Just, again, to try to get rid of the redundancy of the term public way. Okay,
Pete, quick question.
yeah,
A public way, that include a public easement? Not being a wise guy, I'm not sure whether that. I would say not.
29A doesn't allow it, right? 'Cause it says
correct, but
owned.
it's
Right.
not maintained by, well, unless it's a public easement that's maintained.
That's what I'm
by
thinking, a
town.
public easement, but it's owned and maintained, not owned or maintained.
It's owned
Public
and
easement.
maintained.
Yeah, public
Yeah.
easement would be owned by the abutter largely, or some grantor who reserved title,
But the public owns the easement.
but the public owns the easement. Just something to think about.
Yeah,
We don't switch.
lights just went out here.
I think it's the one on the wall beside the light switch. See if that one,
Here,
yeah, does that work? I don't see it ring.
movement sensitive, some,
That's, yeah,
Yeah.
there's motion detector somewhere in there.
we're gonna start.
We gotta keep
throwing
moving
things
while
at
we're,
one
while we're
another.
talking. Yep, Rebecca?
Thanks, Jim. And my question is, there are increasingly a number of facilities that are rented by state agencies that don't own state property underneath, like the building itself is rented. So I'm wondering if there might be some sort of nexus that if you change it to state property, that there might be a problem, or there might be some application of them. And it might be just a question of asking the department or the
Well,
departments.
it
in
does,
control.
I would, okay, I wonder if they would be maintaining those roads in order to use them, even if leased.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Like if it's
I'm
part
sure.
of the rental.
I'm sure corrections maintains their facilities and the roads there. Probably, yeah, Bureau of General Services does all the plowing and road maintenance all around the capital area here. Yeah, whatever the term, Rebecca, I'm just saying, let's get rid of the term public way in those, at least those three cases, and call it something else.
Maybe it's a state use way.
State owned or maintained.
State use way is maybe a shorthand. I don't know.
Not sure we want to come up with answers here, but
Nope.
I'm just raising the
But-
issue.
No, those are all good ideas, so.
What's
That,
the-
I like that, excuse me for interjecting, I like the idea of that state use way, because people shouldn't be just going and doing laps around the state building with their ATVs or whatever, just because it's, they can. This way, if you put like state use, they would be there for a purpose, and that would be it. So, thank you.
There goes my weekend plans.
Doing donuts around the correctional center, I can see that now.
Waiting for them to let Pete out.
What's the application of these terms? Where do they use the words that are defined that way.
In those statutes right there, 36, 34A, 34B. Somewhere in those statutes, it must be using the term public way. And then it refers back to these definitions.
That's a limited use.
So would that be another place to have Westlaw do a search? Or, you know, where those terms come up in the statutes?
I have those. I mean, those are all like part of the stuff that they sent us already. So if you guys want to break it down more, I can send them to you, you know,
Well, Pete, have
Well,
you
get
worked?
more in detail.
Heather, though, when you did that, I did a quick look to see.
Yes,
Because that request you sent in to me, I think was more private related stuff and
Okay.
public easement, private easement.
yeah.
I didn't see a request for way, public way
Okay,
separately.
okay.
So that's why I said there may be other ones here that I just didn't see.
I don't mind putting another request. They've been really nice.
Okay,
The law library. Do you want me to put in
Yeah.
another request on that?
I think if you could double check.
So do you want me just to do it on just public way request, or do you want me to do it on these specific items?
You're not gonna find much, I don't think,
I don't
but
either.
I think you ought to do these specific ones, but
So that would be,
I think I got most of them.
okay.
Okay.
Because we've already done public way, you did a search on.
I did, yeah,
4 terms the legislature asked for, you've done the search, and I know
yeah.
Roberta and I were working from those, so let's, but we could add to that way, town way, public roadway, street, highway, state highway.
I think we did, and we came back with something like,
Well, that was the one.
5
that they said
million.
was huge.
yeah, it was too big.
Oh,
And they said then, and then I think I was waiting for you guys to get back to me on that, what you guys, how you guys wanted to handle it. I can go to the law library and pull them all and, you know, but it's like 5,000 and I don't know if you guys want.
You have a lot of time.
yeah, right.
Why not just target these 3 for a start?
I mean, I can start pulling them and start looking at them. And if, you know, we can take it title by title and see too. I mean, I don't know what you guys, I don't know how much time you guys, I don't know how much time and effort.
Why don't we do this? Public way is the one we have to focus on.
Yeah.
So did you look through all of the terms that Heather had pulled through Westlaw doing that matrix?
No,
Okay. There'll be a lot of references there, but
There's probably there's some way to narrow it down.
I don't know, you had to look at a lot of
So hard.
them, and so did I, so.
so let me say this. Yes, it's in the public safety one about this campus here.
Mhm.
Yes, it's on the correctional facilities. Yes, it's on status institutions under DHHS. What if we just never touch those? What? So what? I mean, is it really
Oh,
gonna
we
have any
can-
impact?
We can leave them alone. We don't
Yeah,
have to do
because
anything.
it
It's
seems
just-
to be very narrowly defined for those places and for the issues we're dealing with. Would it even matter?
Probably not.
If those definitions are limited to those titles, we never bump into them, so to speak, so. We can let them be, and then the question is where we do use it, and we have those questions like. Does public way include public easement, and we can talk about that and whether or not it's ought to or ought not to, and why.
Yeah, and weekend plans are back on.
But we should know where else public way is used, since that's what the legislature asked us, so. If you could, for your next homework assignment, Pete, if you could take a look at all the places where public way turns up. And
You're telling me I gotta look through 5,000?
not 5,000, and if it's that much, I'll break it up with you.
Yeah, I'll meet you down at a pub in Portland and we can do it some night.
Well, 5 beers in, we'll be all set. I'm kidding, that it would take a while to get
Is
through.
that one of the terms I asked us to look at?
That is actually.
Hmm.
So we should make sure we see we should at least consider what all the references are and whether we need to go down that road.
I mean, I don't even.
So
I mean, I can list them all by title and section if it makes it easier in the chart, like I did the master list. And I sent you guys. It's up to you guys though, on what makes sense to you. I don't want to overburden anybody or confuse your thinking process.
I killed a tree and printed out all of them and then threw them. And then decided whether or not they should be added to the list. So
Yeah.
How much of it is searchable electronically?
all of it, but do you want to read your computer and go back and forth?
Well, no, but I'm just wondering, from
I know, I understand. It is searchable.
yeah.
Well, if you have access to Westlaw.
Yeah, if you have access to Westlaw, but you could. If you were to just get the, I was able to download all the bill titles,
So
so.
here's a thought, if you just go on the state site where it has the statute search. And just search there, I bet you won't come up with 5,000,
No,
because the 5,000 probably includes all the case references and everything.
right, and that's why there are a number of things on those 5,000 feet where you don't need to check it out. It's just a case reference, so it means only one beer instead of the public.
All right.
Okay,
Let me do my third one here, which there's some other terms that are kind of closely related to these, and one of them you'll find public roadway. And other places you'll find street or highway, or you'll find state highway or highway. So you can see I found basically Title 23 and 29A. And 29A, the first one was on the Bicycle and Roller Skis Safety Education Act. And they created this public roadway definition, which to me could be eliminated and referred back to either 23 or 29A for the definition of a public way instead of a public roadway. Probably no one connected that when that bill created that, and to me, that's an easy one. The next one down in 29A, there's actually definitions for street or highway, which means a public way. Okay, maybe eliminate that and just say public way again everywhere. And thirdly, under the Traveler Information Act in Title 23, it uses the term state highway or highway, which again is any public way so designated, including the interstate, primary, secondary highways. What it doesn't really say here, does it include local roads? But to me, that's another place where we could possibly use the term public way. And then there's actually a definition of highway, which is all the right of way that has been laid out by the state, county, or a town. And then lastly, there's the general terminology one in the classification statute that talks about state highways, state aid highways, and townways. So there's some room there for some consolidating. I don't have any particular recommendations on anything else from here. But those, to me, there's a lot of redundancy here and it could be cleaned up.
another way might be to look at public ways being the broad term and then highway being state highways. And townways being townways, not being, I don't think of a townway as being a type of highway, let's put it that way.
The trouble is, there are a lot of other statutes that refer to a highway when they mean a town way, so it would mean changing everything.
Yeah. Try not to do too much violence to the statute.
Yeah, because you see by that fourth line there, highway means anything that's state, county, or town.
Yeah, on the other hand, the first half of Title 20 of 23 is all state roads and it talks about highways throughout.
Yeah.
Then you get over to the other provisions for municipalities and generally it talks about townways, generally. So that's how, Rebecca, do you have anything to weigh in on this?
Thinking about limited use, but there are some limited use, but I don't know if it shows up right off the top of my head. I'm also, I have Roberta's, but I don't have Pete's. So I'm trying to find that document.
Went out with the agenda for today. Heather sent that out.
Oh, okay. So I didn't lock down through the agenda too deep. That's why.
It's in like the terms folder. It's a zip file if you unzip it. And then
Ah,
the priority group file.
unzip it.
Another thing that I'm thinking of here is, I forget where it was that my husband ran across it, but someplace there's a definition of thoroughfare. And it includes, going through the woods from one marked tree to another.
Marked tree.
Spotted trees, I guess is the term it uses.
Yeah, there used to be a requirement too of perambulating municipal boundaries every 10 years where the municipal officers would have to physically walk the boundaries of the municipality. There are a lot, so that thoroughfare definition, yeah, it fits right up there in antiquated things that we,
I think we should just start all over. Create the state all from the beginning.
That's a good idea.
So those are the three basic public terminology terms that I came up with, which I think I probably had the easiest job of the three of us. Because the others can get much more complicated.
Right. Well, we're gonna complicate your life a little bit more in the public way piece, but I think you're gonna find that out of all of those, a lot of those are really case references. And you don't have to do anything with those. It's just the statutes that you're interested in. We're using the actual statute and if it's relevant. Because as you pointed out, the looking at the state facilities, they've got their own definition for their own purpose. Great.
So Jim, Heather, you legal attorney folks type. When you say a Westlaw search, can you explain exactly what that search is for and gives you? Other than statutes?
So usually when you do like a Westlaw search, it pulls everything. So it'll even pull the case law for the state of Maine on anything that's been adjudicated on public ways, town ways, definitions, even if it really doesn't even have to do with something, but it's just mentioned town ways.
Or
So
at
is
the end
that
of,
like
at the end of
anything
it,
from Supreme Court down to a district court, any? case that
generally
comes across?
state law, the state Supreme Court, the law court.
Yeah.
I think you can specify.
Filtered,
which
I can, but if I just do a search
It's gonna turn up.
on just like ways, it pulls everything. If I do a statute search, it'll just show me the statutes.
And when we say everything, when you look through the Westlaw version of the statute, you get the road statute, and then after you get little snippets, annotations of pieces of the parts of the case that are relevant to that statute. And so you'll go through maybe 15 cases at the end. So you get 15 hits.
Yeah, in the old days, the statutes themselves, the hard book copies, you'd get the case notes
That's right.
mailed to you and then you insert them.
That's right. You get the update.
That's
the
what you
latest
law
cases.
Yeah.
going online. You don't have that anymore.
No, instead you find everything online and yeah.
But
you have it all.
But. Okay, but not everybody has access to Westlaw.
This is true. You have to pay for it.
Right.
Oh,
But what happened here is that the state law library has access. Heather was able to get in touch with the library, and the library ran a search for these terms and then gave Heather the results. So that's why you'll get like 5,000 pages, because it is every hit, every time that term shows up in a case. Or there are rules, you've heard Rule 80B and Rule 80C for administrative appeals from, like an MDOT decision or some administrative body's decision. DEP makes a decision that gets appealed. The town planning board makes a decision that gets appealed. There are notes on Rule 80B. And those notes mention cases, and Westlaw picks those up too. So you're getting all kinds of extraneous references and not just statutes when we get back that information that Heather found. So you won't have 5,000 statutes to list. But
so
there could
Jim,
be,
for your private company, does every private law firm have to pay a subscription to get into this?
just like radio, you have to pay what you used to get for free. No, we've always had to pay a subscription, even for the red books, as we call them, the statute books. But if you continue to get the books, because they print many fewer of them now in the digital age, they're very expensive. And now everybody has to have some LexisNexis is another
I
legal
was gonna
research
ask
tool.
that, is Westlaw and LexisNexis separate?
They're competitors.
They are.
Yeah.
But they give you the same thing,
Not necessarily. It's
almost.
you don't get the case annotations in the same way with LexisNexis. You don't get that whole service, and that's the benefit of Westlaw and why people might pay their premium, but LexisNexis has some other benefits.
Okay,
Well,
thank you for
the other
that
thing-
It's wonderful.
The other thing you can always do is you can go to the law library and get on their computer and they've got access to
Well,
Westlaw.
that's it. Yeah.
Because back in the old days, before we had a computer at our place, I spent hours and hours and hours in the law library. And it was kind of interesting to see that first the main statutes fit in 2 volumes. And then they came up with the main revised statutes and it took up 2 shelves. And then you go on Westlaw.
Now, you say in the law library, you're talking about the main law library?
Right in the state.
Right,
house.
first floor of the state house.
Okay, and I don't know if you know this, Jim, but like in our county, and I'm assuming it's like that in every county, we have to maintain a law
That's
library.
correct.
And there's a computer access there for the public that can walk in. Is that something someone can walk in and search through our system or no?
Yes, yes. They-
It used to be some counties you could and some counties you couldn't. I remember going to Portland and they said we could, but there was some other county we went to that said we
Maybe
couldn't.
some other county just doesn't know they're required to do that.
I mean, and once upon a time, you used to be able to access the county law library 24 hours a day until some people
If you were an
started.
attorney.
Well, there were even some people off the street who were pro se counsel, bringing their own cases, who, until they were found sleeping there, that they decided to cut the hours a little bit.
Yeah, I think we found that if there was already an attorney in there and you went in before the doors closed, that they sort of wouldn't notice and you could stay later.
There you go. But anyway, these things used to happen and don't so much anymore.
Right.
All right, so those are some of the concepts that Pete has found going through the terms that he was searching, and continue to do that. And I'll work with you, Pete, so you can get through all the Westlaw hits and see what's really relevant there. Similarly, I took the pile of materials that Westlaw provided regarding public easements that Heather had turned up in the search, and went through them to see, what's really helpful, what's needed, and then what's not. That's the matrix that I provided, talking about public easement, where it turns out the biggest problem, or one of the major problems that I see, is that there are 2 different definitions right in Title 23 itself. Title 23 is roads and highways. As I said, the first part is state roads, then county roads, then municipal roads. And so Title 23 is really kind of central to what we do as a commission. And when you look there are 2 definitions of public easement, and it really depends upon how a public easement is created. If you have a public easement because it's left over after a road discontinuance or abandonment, or because it's created by a municipality in order to get to a place, but the municipality doesn't have an obligation to maintain it, or if it's an old private way used by farmers to get their produce to town, that's one type of public easement. But if your public easement was of a different sort, then actually the one for farmers, I'm sorry, it's the one for farmers. I was confusing it with the one that's set out for recreational easements. No, if it was set out for farmers, then it's a different type of public easement, in that ATVs, snowmobiles, and electric wheelchairs cannot operate on those roads. So you could say to a police officer, hey, I want that ATV stopped on that public easement. And now the law enforcement officer has to figure out, well, was this public easement created because it was an old private way that farmers used for cultivated land to ship crops to town? Or was this because of an event no law enforcement officer can or would or could reasonably be expected to answer that question?
They
So
will-
my
they
question
will
is
say it's a
this.
civil matter and they won't touch it.
Oh, that too, yeah. Depends how civil the ATV operator's being, but why is there any concern I think I know why, but from anybody from the ATV or snowmobile folks, why is there this difference between public easements that were created on roads connecting farms and cultivated lands to public ways versus all the other types of public easements that are left over after discontinuance, that are left over after abandonment, that are created specifically to provide access? Why is, Roberta, I want to hear from you, but I want to hear first from the snowmobile and ATV folks.
Jim, that's definitely a stumper from our angle. The land for trails is generally accessed by a club member that goes to the landowner and makes an agreement with them. A handshake generally is what we ask for. With the advent of digital mapping, we are spending way more time, and Brian can attest to this, of GPS and trail. So liability reasons, we have it documented that, hey, I was on a trail or I was not on a trail, can make a big difference in somebody getting hurt and following up on it. But I don't know that there was really a clear way of, boy, we want to borrow your farm right of way, as opposed to just using the right of way that the town had because they discontinued that piece of road. I'm really kind of baffled on why that's called out differently. And obviously the addition of an electric wheelchair, that's really not a brand new or not a real old piece of equipment. So that's obviously been modified somewhat recent, I would think. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of an angle I was thinking about.
Okay.
Isn't that the new law? I mean, when they passed the new law, they stipulated, because under the old public easement was open, including ATVs and snowmobiles. Under the new law, it doesn't automatically. Isn't that how that came about? Is that different?
This is, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't think so, Brian. I think this is just my opinion. I think years ago, when laws got passed and things got decided, I think the thought was that if you discontinued a road and retained a public easement, there probably wasn't going to be people living on that discontinued road. And the purpose of retaining the public easement was so you could continue to use the road for things like walking or accessing water body maybe. And then ATVs and snowmobiles came along and it gave an opportunity to use a road that wasn't going to have vehicles on it generally, let alone houses. The second section here, after layout and taking, there aren't many places, I don't think, in Maine where towns lay out and take for public easements. They may lay out and take for town ways, but there are a few examples where public easements are laid out and taken for that use. And I think it was to differentiate between town ways and public easements where vehicles are going to be expected to be, and they didn't want to have that conflict of, it's like, why can't you take an ATV or a snowmobile go down the main drag for the most part in this state, right? Because it would be a problem if you had ATVs and snowmobiles on the same road as vehicles traveling.
Right, I mean, part of it could be like 29A. The definition of motor vehicle, they've excluded ATVs and snowmobiles from it in 29A.
Right.
That was an intentional act. And that may have resulted in some of this as well, just to clarify. What's interesting in other areas, motor vehicle kind of includes ATVs or snowmobiles, or maybe one or not the other. And which is, I think a lot of it's got to do with, like you said, timing, who was putting the law on the books and what the reasoning behind it was. Because under 29A, motor vehicles, we've said that they, in fact, I don't know how many years ago now it was, there was a while where people were actually registering ATVs as motor vehicles.
Yeah.
They were putting on regular tires and lights and blinkers and getting them inspected and registered. And the state police put an end to that. They put legislation in that ended that because it created a significant conflict. And the side by sides when they came along was the big reason for that because there are people, and we just went through it on our width definition where they want to say, well, all right, my machine's wider than your maximum width, so I want to register it as a like pickup, and then I'm exempt. But under 29A, we said, no, you can't do that.
Okay,
So I'm guessing those two things combined probably
yeah.
need to bring a ball here and play toss. That way,
I don't wanna step on anybody's toes if somebody were to have a comment, but I did have one more question.
Let's, you go ahead.
You know what, now I forgot what was I wanted to say. Go ahead, Roberta.
Okay, my point of view on it is a little bit different. Because I've gone so much back into the history of private ways and how they became public easements. And it was kind of an evolutionary process, and I'll get into this more when I go over the terms that I went into. But way back, like in the 1800s, when somebody needed access to their property, they had a piece of property that wasn't connected to the public road system, and they needed access so that maybe they could get people to their mill or whatever, their farm, their business. And they could go to the town and say, I need access over this other guy's land, but he won't sell it to me. And the town could agree to lay out a private way to connect his business to the public road system, or even just his residence to the public road system. It was invariably a dead end because it had to be something that wasn't already connected to the road system, and they were going to make just one connection. So on a dead end, you don't get a lot of through traffic. Most of the people who go down that dead end are going down there because they're going to do business with that person that requested it. And at that time, how did you build a road in the 1800s? You cut down the trees and maybe leveled it a little bit, and that was it. So it wasn't a huge expense. And so the landowner who requested it was expected to pay the damages to the person whose property was being taken. And then it doesn't say anything about road maintenance or building or anything. So it's just sort of left up to the person who needed it to clear it and make it into a road. And then all during the 1800s, there's a bunch of cases that are cited on private ways that all talk about as if it's a private road, essentially. And yeah, the public is allowed in onto it, but it's basically a private road. And then over time, the court started looking at it, and first they said, well, yes, it's a private way, but the public could go there theoretically if they ever wanted to. So there is a public purpose for it. And then they said, well, there has to be more than just a theoretical public use. The public has to actually go there occasionally. And then they said, well, no, there has to be an actual public need for the road. You can't just take this other person's property unless there's a public need for it. And then come the 1900s, they're really changing it. And it got eventually to the point where they said, these are really public ways and we should change the name so it reflects that they're public ways. And they changed the name from private way to public easement. But kind of at the same time, they brought in these other public easements. They changed the law to say that when a road is discontinued in 1965, they said that when a townway is discontinued, it automatically retains and they first said private way. Well, you think about it, these aren't dead end roads going to one person's business. These are through roads. And so all of a sudden you've created something that's different from what a private way was before.
And at the same time, the municipality was given the authority to lay out recreational easements that also were public easements. All this happened in 76 when they
Okay,
renamed
so
it.
I'm talking about 65. Then you
Right.
jump ahead to
Yep.
76. And what happened in 76 was they changed the name from private way to public easement. So now you've changed what it is and you've changed the name for it. So is it really the same thing as what it was before? Or should we still have private ways that are what they used to be and have public easements that are something else?
And on top of that, just to follow it up and then we'll get over to Ryan's point, the 3021 incorporates the discontinued roads that were private ways that are now public easements. It includes public easements that are created to get to recreational areas, and it includes all of these old private ways. But then in the next section, 3022, it says, municipal officers, council, or the, may lay out a public easement for any occupant of land, or for owners who have cultivated land in the municipality, if it will be connected to a townway or highway after the establishment of the public easement. Sounds like a classic private way.
That comes from the original private ways.
But these are the ones that, notwithstanding any of the provision of this chapter, public easements laid out under this section, 3022, are limited to rights of access by foot or motor vehicle as defined in Title 29A, which then leaves out snowmobiles, ATVs, and electric wheelchairs.
Right,
So
I still think
it's
that,
just-
I mean, my recollection is that's a fairly recent,
95.
because we've had this discussion and they definitively said, we're going to clarify that these public easements or whatever, don't give us snowmobile and ATV access. And then when they amended it a few years ago, they added in the electric vehicle.
So the question is, like, in my mind, does it make any sense to have these two different types of public easements? And if there's a problem with wheelchairs, snowmobiles, and ATVs, isn't it more global than just those? And so with that,
I think you answered my question, but I'm not sure. The question I had was, when did the state pass a law that spelled out how a municipality can discontinue a road?
had that on the books for a long time, but it was.
It's
Yeah,
been
I
amended.
think it goes way back, but
Yeah.
it's the major amendments in it. 1965 was when they changed from it becomes nothing to it saves a private way. And then 76, they changed it from saying private way to saying public easement.
But
And
prior to
then
that,
was
60
it,
65 presumption.
2019, I think, they changed the abandonment law to
Yeah.
say that the public easement that's kept goes by that definition of motor vehicle that excludes ATVs and
Right.
snowmobiles.
But prior to 65, when was the first law in the books that gave a municipality that? Path.
1800s.
Yeah, it goes back a long ways. The presumption was no public easement unless you said so in the order.
And the other thing that comes into it is that the counties, the law was different from towns. County ways, they never did automatically become public easements when they discontinued them. And in 1976, as you know,
The
county ways and organized townships became townways.
Yeah.
So then they come under that law. So it gets confusing because you have a road that's now a town way. And it was discontinued sometime between 1965 and 1976, and you have to look back and see whether it was a town way then or whether it was a county way then. Because if it was discontinued as a county way, there's no easement, but if it was discontinued as a town way, then there is an easement.
Rebecca, you have a hand raised.
I do. I just want to draw attention that there is I think a need for the private way because there are a number of locations that are expectations of public use that has been established, but the ownership has not been extinguished underneath. And it's easier for that person to extinguish the easement in future than it is for them to give up that ownership. So for instance, a parking lot that was not actually there before, that is currently something that is used for a lot of events, etc. That is subject to gates and bars. That person can make a decision to shut that off. And there is a wide expectation of the public being able to use that, but it's not a public easement in that there isn't an unfettered access piece. And there wouldn't necessarily be the nexus with the ATV trails, but I think a lot of times these particular definitions came out of a desire to maintain the underlying ownership and the ease of extinguishing an easement versus giving a road to somebody and then pulling that back. So if you have a recreational trail, you have a logging trail that you're using, but you're not going to be harvesting there for another 20, 30 years, you can have an easement, a public easement, which relieves some liability from you for that access. And then you can revoke that easement or you can negotiate with that community to take that easement back, but you've never lost the underlying ownership of it. So
No.
there very well may be some instances where that is necessary. And likewise, necessary for there to be enforcement of motor vehicle law.
But does it make sense to have the two different definitions in essence, or uses of public easement in 3021 and 3022? Depending on how it was created and when? I can understand a reason why somebody, and Roberta and I have discussed this a bit. I can understand a reason why someone who owns the fee in the road and gets there and back because of the public easement might be concerned about the effect of people operating ATVs and snowmobiles. Snowmobiles could interfere with your own snow maintenance work that you have to do because the town isn't doing it, perhaps, because the town decides not to maintain that public easement. And the ATVs could rip up the road that you're paying to maintain if the town doesn't do that. So maybe the concern about ATV and snowmobile access is really related to whether it's being maintained by the town or the private owner, and not by how it's created. Is that?
Or
I
by the
think that's-
club.
I mean, the reality is, as John pointed out earlier, the far and away the majority of our ATV and snowmobile trails are under landowner permission, not under easement. There are a few places where we have access because of the easement based on the town. But that's what's created the friction, and we routinely tell clubs, go deal with the landowners and get landowner permission, because particularly on the ATV side, the other sections of law stipulate you have to have landowner permission to operate. So there's this big debate in some areas where if I own the land under the road, or I own both sides of the road, town says it's got a public easement, they can, tell the club they can use it. I say, no, you can't, because you didn't get my permission. Which one's right? What we're encouraging in 95% of the cases that exist out there are the clubs are dealing with the landowners.
Should that then be the case for all public easements? That, because it's going to be hard for any snowmobiler to say, oh, that's a public easement that the town has voted to fund and maintain. They're just not going to know that if they're going through 5 towns on their snowmobile. Would it be easier, better than to say that snowmobiles and ATVs are only allowed on public easements where they have landowner permission?
Well,
But then you get the nexus and they are allowed to use the municipally owned public easement.
Right, if there is a public easement.
Do you, okay, if, no, not a municipally owned public easement, but a municipally maintained easement,
Could be
right?
owned.
Well, you're back to.
Well,
own
you
and
own the easement, not the fee. All I'm saying, that's,
It could be municipally laid out roads for recreational purpose
it could be.
on municipally owned land.
But there again, do you want to get the landowner in all instances to give permission?
In that case, the landowner would be the town.
Well, if the
If it was
public, no,
municipally owned, it would obviously be theirs.
well, in all instances, the municipality is going to, in essence, own the public easement. It's the land underneath the easement that's going to be owned by the abutters or a grantor. Common grantor. It's not an easy one to fix. Steve.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, so in most of these instances, if you wouldn't be allowed to go through because of is it 3021 and 3022? Is that what it is?
Right.
You'd exclude ATVs, but you'd allow pickup trucks, right? And you're saying like, that's the thing, who's maintaining it again, like you were talking about a while ago, that's a big question, especially the associated liability. But I do think the easiest way, which would give the ATV and snow sledders a lot more flexibility too, of course, and there's inherent problems with that, but if you would take out that exclusion from ATVs, I don't know why, like to me, an ATV, we own one, I'm not a big ATVer, but it's much softer touch than going down the same road on a pickup truck. I mean, so there's that. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there. To me, it'd be simplified that way. And then if it was a situation where it was indeed a private road or something, then somebody could put their own rules on it, and they'd have to post it or whatever. Just a thought there.
So can I, just for clarification, as I understand this enactment as of 2019 basically says a public easement established under this section. It says no snowmobiles, no ATVs, and no electric vehicles, but what that said was the public easement doesn't give the right. It doesn't mean that the landowner can't give permission, does it? It just says you gotta talk to the landowner, correct?
No, in that instance, if it says the public easement doesn't allow that, I would think they're not allowed on the way.
Yeah, this is one of the questions that's come up is, can the landowner give permission to use an ATV on it? And if the landowner himself has an ATV, is he prohibited from using it to
Yeah.
access his own land?
Cause I mean, if I've got an easement across my property for camp owners. Which means I can't stop them on the camp road, right? But that. They don't have the right to tell me what I can do on that road. I still own the land. I can't stop them because they have an easement to their camp. I would think the same thing is true here. The easement doesn't guarantee us right to go with an ATV, but. I guess that's the big question, because if the easement, because of this language now says we can't even get permission from a landowner, even though the landowner is willing to give it. That's problematic.
That's one of the things that I think needs to be sorted out.
I think it's worth mentioning that in transportation this year, there are two different bills that would allow vehicles that are considered ATV or OTVs to be considered vehicles. Which
Yeah.
means they would not be prohibited from using them. And so it's about a classification. And we're talking about the bigger 4x4, not just the four-wheelers and the ATVs. So it's worth thinking about more holistically, because it's essentially what that definition is for an ATV in this moment in time that might not be future-proof for how that gets decided in.
And
No,
that's
no.
the
No, and
problem.
ironically, the way to get around it is make bigger, heavier vehicles that are gonna do more damage. Like, as the folks know, they're for ATVs now, they look as big as a Jeep, a lot of them, So, anyway, but I think relatively speaking, an ATV, the way I looked at them, where you actually straddle a seat, and they have like balloon tires, not a lot of weight compared to trucks, and you do generally less damage if you have to get from point A to point B, and you had that opportunity.
And, another thing that comes into it is, if you go back to the historic private ways way back, we didn't have ATVs back then. We didn't have four-wheel drive back then. In fact, there's a picture that I think I've showed here before of Route 1 being repaired that I got from the DOT. Repaired Route 1 in, I think it was 1911 or something like that. And it's being done with a horse cart and several men with shovels. And that's the kind of road that most of these roads were built to be back in the 1800s and early 1900s. We didn't have motor vehicles back then. And now, because we do have them, are they all automatically allowed to use a road that wasn't built for it? Are we required to build the road past our place that wasn't maintained by the town since at least 1904, as far as we can figure out? Why do we have to build a road that will now support 80 to 100,000 pound log trucks, which have used that road on a regular basis? And it kind of doesn't leave much for the residents. So again, should we have a separate definition for these early private ways that were not built for the kind of stuff we've got now? It's kind of like, how do we get the genie back in the bottle? Because we've said that these are vehicular roads, and now all of a sudden a vehicle isn't what it used to be. And I agree that four-wheel drive vehicles, four-wheel drive pickups can do a lot of damage to a road. The problem that we have with the ATVs, when there is a problem, usually the ATV clubs are very good about seeing that the trails are maintained, seeing that they're closed down during mud season. They try to police them, but it's the road rider who doesn't belong to the ATV club who comes in when the trails aren't open yet in mud season and does donuts in the middle of the road, or goes into a puddle and just guns it and sees how high they can splash the water. They're the ones that do the real damage. And the other damage that you see from them is, my husband has explained this to me, ATVs do not have a differential, so when they go around a corner, they scrub. So you get to, stir up marks any place that they've gone around a corner. So my thought is that, maybe we need to look at having a private way that is a private way again. The other piece that comes into that is that under the law, discontinued roads did not keep a public easement private way until 1965 on townways and
Not on
town
an
and county
automatic
ways.
basis, not automatically.
Right. But you show me where in the law before that it said that they could do it. Because it's not in there. They just started doing it. Towns and counties both started doing it. And I think the reason is that they realized when they discontinued a road with no easement, they left people landlocked. And they were trying to find some solution to it. And their solution was, well, we'll keep a private way. And what I think they intended by that in most cases was we will keep access for the private landowners. I don't think they intended it to be a public anything goes easement. But it got, slowly morphed into that.
Yeah, I think that the idea was that if you had a townway and suddenly you take away the public right of access, the abutters have had their property devalued and they may not have access. But if we let them continue to have a public easement, they can get to their property and we don't have to pay such a great amount of damages because they still have a right to get
It
there.
was a good idea, but it's not in the law. There wasn't anything that said they could do that.
There wasn't anything in the statute, but there was in case law. And so, for example, if you read Brown v. Connor from 1944, it talks about the private way subject to gates and bars that historically could be kept at the option of the municipality when discontinuing a way.
Here's where my husband would say, you look at the Constitution.
I know,
The Constitution says laws can be made by the legislature, not by the courts.
well, laws are interpreted by the courts and the courts have interpreted that to allow for,
They've interpreted to add something into the law that isn't there.
it sounds like another discussion, but
So are you saying that there is no such thing today as a private easement?
No, that's a different term.
I mean, a private way, sorry.
yeah,
They've all been now made public easements?
Yeah.
Yeah, no matter when they were done.
And no matter under which statutory scheme they
they're
were.
considered public easements as of 1976. So how do we feel about the idea of there being one definition of public easement and that all of these vehicles can be used? Rather than have, right now we've got two, even though they're both called the same thing in the same statute, one section apart.
I like that idea personally. And as was mentioned a while ago, the restriction that's in there for ATVs and snow sleds doesn't protect against logging trucks, so we still have problems, so.
I'd be in agreement just for clarification reasons. Because it does leave on the table for a landowner to, I don't like ATVs, but I do like sleds, and it really just clouds the waters for enforcement.
Snowmobiles really don't usually do much damage to a road because they're riding on top of the snow. The issue with snowmobiles is when you've got a plowed road and you got somebody coming down the road with his plow with snow billing up in front of it, and you come over a blind hill and meet somebody coming the other way on a snowmobile. And that actually happened to my husband. He came over the top of a hill, and he didn't know there's a snowmobile coming barreling up the hill in the other direction. And they met. Fortunately, nobody was injured.
Gonna ask
Did some
you why.
damage to the snowmobile.
Yeah.
But that's the issue with plowed roads with snowmobiles. If they're not being plowed, that's something else again. And this is another confusion that gets into the law, is that in the snowmobile law, it says that snowmobiles are allowed on closed roads. And then it gives a definition of a closed road as being the statute that allows the town to close the road to winter maintenance, in other words, not do snow removal on that road. But a lot of towns have thought that the word closed was synonymous with the word discontinued, because the two have been sometimes used kind of loosely. And so they say, oh, closed road, that means all our discontinued roads are open to snowmobiles. And that's not true, because you can have discontinued roads that have people living on them and plowing them.
So we can see that there's some issues here. We're not going to resolve it today, but those are some of the issues and concerns that we have. There are a couple of other issues with regard to the use of the term public easement, and it's probably the biggest source of mischief is in Title 23 as well, under 3101 through 3105. The first four sections deal with private roads, but it was called private ways, which of course we know means traditionally public easements. And then but it was meant to allow people to establish road commissions to take care of private roads. It's been kind of fixed by the legislature, but not quite, because they still use the term private way. And so do you mean that you can form a road commission on a public easement? And maybe that would make sense where the town doesn't want to fix the town easement, the public easement. You could allow the private landowners to do that by agreement, by group, and be better than one cutting another's access off. But anyway, that's out there to try to fix. And yeah, those are really the major things. So with that, I think Pete and I have paved the way for Roberta to talk about.
You can pave our road.
Perfect. No, we're not going to pave your road. We'll wish you well. So Roberta, you were looking at private road and private way.
Yeah. And we've already touched on a lot of it, so hopefully I can get through this even faster than I was thinking I would. Okay, let's take private ways first, since we were just talking about public easements. The ones that are most problematic are the definition, because they conflict with each other and in some cases conflict with themselves. And one of the things that I noted was that some of them are just apply to one chapter, some of them apply to even the smaller place than that. So definitions, 23 MRSA section 1903, as used in this chapter, and this is Traveler Information Services. A private way means a private road. That's not a public easement. Driveway, that's not a public easement. Or public easement, as defined in section 3021. So which is it? Does a private way mean a private road, or does it mean a public road? It basically says that a private way may be either private or public, who knows? Can one party have the other arrested for trespassing on private property? Or can the other party have the first arrested for obstructing a public way? No wonder we can't get anybody to enforce it, because you call law enforcement and they come out and they say, we don't know which it is. It's a civil matter. You'll have to take it to court to figure it out. So it leaves people shooting at each other because they can't get anybody to enforce anything.
And for context, 1903 is part of the state highway sign law.
It's in Traveler Information Services.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I thought we just said private ways were no longer.
But the term still appears in the law all over the place, and that's part of the issue.
So it's still.
Because
the
we
legislature
have a
cleaned things up.
definition that says that private ways are public easements, but then we have these other definitions that say there's something else.
Hey,
It also-
Roberta. I'm trying to follow along. Which document are the ones you're looking at?
I'm on the one that says notes on Westlaw search for private ways. Actually, you probably don't have that, come to think of it.
I sent out an
Yeah,
email
we got
about,
the electron.
yeah, I sent out an email about 30 minutes to you before this started to you guys.
Thanks. Yep. Okay. Wrong email. Thank you.
It's okay. I think it's like double copied a couple of places, but
I apologize for being so last minute and getting stuff out.
you did nicely where she bolded it in color. So it'll help
But
you.
again, if the private way has been it isn't really eliminated if it's still in Title 23.
Yeah, the legislature thought it took care of it in 76 when they made all private ways public easements in Title 23, but they still left the term in the state motor in other sections of the law, including
And this
the billboard
is in
law.
Title 23.
Yeah, this is the billboard law, basically.
Sorry, Roberta, you said you're referring to notes on Westlaw search for private road? Or
Private ways.
Private. Okay.
The handouts I gave you guys.
Yeah, got it.
You got the right one?
Yeah, there was one for private roads and one for private ways. But, yeah.
And that's part of the community days that we got terms of.
Let's just start over.
If it's possible next time to send out the attachments in advance, I would print them out and have them at the ready. I have them electronically, but I don't. Like it's too much for me to try to follow that, but just for future meetings, it'd be better. in
I
advance.
apologize. Roberta sent it to me about 40 minutes before the commission.
Oh,
meeting
no,
started.
that's fine. Just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
I apologize. This has been, like I was saying earlier, today has been one of those weeks. Where, I try to take one day at a time, but lately several of them have jumped me at once. So I've been way behind the 8 ball, and I do apologize for that. Let's see, then we have also in Title 23 in Section 3021. And this definition says, as used in this chapter, and the chapter is acquisition of property for highway purposes. So then you have the public easement definition that says it's an easement held by a municipality for purposes of public access to land or water not otherwise connected to a public way, and includes all rights enjoyed by the public with respect to private ways created by statute prior to July 29th, 1976. Private ways created pursuant to former sections 3001 and 3004 prior to July 29th, 1976 are public easements. And 3001 and 3004 date back to is it 1959 or 1954?
1954.
Yeah, and then 1940s, there was, I think, a similar rule. I don't think the discontinuance law changed very much in there. So this statute defines private ways as being public easements. And section 3026 and 3028, and now 3026A and 3028A, those are discontinuance and abandonment, retain a public easement when a road is discontinued or abandoned unless otherwise specified. What is the need for public access when there is no water or public land?
Roberta, can I ask you a question on that question?
Yeah.
When I read that statute and it says public access to land or water, I don't interpret it as public land. I interpret public access to land, including like land that I might own that I need to get to. You see it as public land, like there's a park there or something?
What I'm saying is, why does it need to be public access? Is there some way to make that into private access? And this was the attempt a few years ago in the discontinuance statute, where they added in a provision where the public easement can be discontinued if the landowners can agree to grant each other private easements. And this gets interesting. I've told the legislature many times that there are 3 solutions to the problem of discontinued roads, and all 3 of them are unconstitutional. The old way was you discontinue it, it's gone. Well, that leaves properties without access. Access is a property right attached to the property which cannot be taken or damaged without due process and just compensation. In order to make just compensation for a piece of land that you can't get to now, you have to essentially buy the property. And if the whole reason for discontinuing the road is to save the town money for, maintenance costs, they're not going to be able to buy all the properties of buying the road. So that doesn't work. So the solution to that was, okay, we'll keep private ways over them. And what they meant at the time was we'll keep private access for the property owners. But then the court said, well, you can't do that because that's taking one person's private property and giving it to another person for his private access. And that's taking your private property for private use, which you can't do, no matter how much you compensate. That's not allowed under the Constitution. So that was unconstitutional. So then they came up with the idea, well, they're not really private ways, they're really public ways. That means there's a public purpose for keeping the easement, and that makes it constitutional. But the problem with that is when you have a public easement with no public maintenance, Then you look at the case of Jordan versus Canton, where there was a statute that only lasted 2 or 3 years before it got repealed. That said that the selectmen of a town could declare a road to be of limited use and value to the traveling public and just stop maintaining it. But it was still a public road and not discontinued, and the abutters could maintain it if they wanted to on a strictly voluntary basis. And it only took it from 1968 to 1970 to make its way all the way to the Maine Supreme Court. And the court said that a public road with no public maintenance will inevitably be destroyed. And they were very clear that it doesn't matter what the legal process is by which it got to be a public road with no maintenance. But whatever the legal status is, if the result is that there is public use with no public maintenance, it will destroy the road. And that's unconstitutional because it destroys property access, and we're back where we started. So what I've been saying for years is if you've got 3 solutions and they're all unconstitutional, look at which one does the least damage. Well, for a number of years, we got along pretty well with making these into private ways. And there weren't an awful lot of objections to it in the court. There were a few, but there weren't major ones. And what's happening now is that most of these discontinued roads were laid out so long ago that when the property was taken for the road, what usually happened in these old roads was the town or the county didn't actually buy the right of way in fee simple. They just took an easement over it. So the land under the road still belongs to the abutting property owners. And if that road is ever discontinued, that land is supposed to go back to the people that still own it, free of the easement. The easement is no longer theirs. Now their land, they can build their stone wall down the middle of it, build their barn in it, whatever. But these roads were taken so long ago that the people whose land was taken for the road are dead by now. They're not going to come back and complain that they don't get their land back. So how much damage does it really do? The people who own the land currently, you could say, well, yes, they're next in the chain of title. They should inherit their land back again, but they've never had the use of that land while it was a road. So how much are they really damaged by having it still be a road? And they will be damaged less by having it used by a few property owners who have an interest in keeping that road maintained so they still have access to their property. That does a lot less damage than having the general public using it, and the public doesn't care what they leave behind because they don't have to use that road. They don't own property in there. So this is why I suggested the idea of let the property owners have a choice. If they voluntarily make it a private easement, then it's not unconstitutional because you're not forcibly taking their land. So give them the choice and see what
And
happens.
the choice is
The choice.
private easement or
The choice is either you can get together with your neighbors and you can all hash out together what works for you. What limitations do you have to have on it in order to agree with each other this evening? If you can work out some kind of an agreement that works for you and your neighbors, then you can make it into a private easement. If you can't come to an agreement, then the public bylaw is going to have to keep the public easement there because they can't destroy property access. So you take your pick. Do you want everybody and his brother using it 365 days in the year, 24 hours a day? Or do you want to have just your neighbors using it and taking care of it? You choose.
Becca has her hand raised.
Rebecca? The owl walk.
Thanks, sorry. I just have to correct one thing. The Jordan versus Canton decision was not talking about all of the statutes and all of the ways in which a road can be discontinued or non-maintained. It was specific to that statute, which was deemed unconstitutional and therefore was repealed. So that decision doesn't apply beyond the statute that it was looking to interpret that was applied in that decision. So
Yeah, it was a special class of limited use roads that the legislature created.
exactly. And that there are other ways, and Ryan would be very familiar with how that works in the county, the limited maintenance and the closing of roads for the winter that have a public process. And that particular statute had no public process. So that decision doesn't mean that all non-maintenance is unconstitutional. It meant that that particular statute was unconstitutional, which is why it was repealed.
But if you look at, I agree, it was with regard to one particular statute. But if you look at the wording of that decision carefully, it says, it talks about putting through a limited access highway. And the limited access highway doesn't allow access from the side roads. All of a sudden, the person on the side road has no access. And they said that this is the same thing. If you take away a person's access, if you destroy or even damage a person's access, it doesn't matter what statute you're going under. And it says that cases of loss of access don't depend on what statute is used or what process is used. They depend on the actual and factual consequences of governmental action. And so if the consequence of governmental action is that the public is using the road and not maintaining it, then what it says is that public use in the absence of public maintenance will destroy the road. And that's what's unconstitutional. It does mention the matter of not having any due process, but mostly what that case hammered on, it sort of mentions that briefly in the context of one of the cases it refers to, but most of what it's talking about is not due process, but compensation. And they said there has to be just compensation for the taking of the access. And as I said before, if you remove all of a person's access, you've got to compensate them for the entire use of their land because they can't get there anymore. If you even damage their access, Jordan versus Canton says you have to compensate them for the damage to the access. So does that mean that anytime a mud runner comes through and damages the public easement, that the town has got to come back and pay the person for repairing their road? So that's where I say this applies to other statutory processes, not just for the limited use or highway.
So I think we have a difference of interpretation on Jordan v. Canton.
Now, there's one paragraph there, pages 99 to 100 of the decision.
You pointed it out to
If you take out the word limited use or highway, take out that phrase and plug in public easement, it fits exactly.
For another
Try
day.
doing that.
So how would you fix this again on 3021?
Okay.
We don't have to reach solutions today, but just if there's some fixes that you're thinking of or suggesting to consider.
Okay. One thing that I would suggest is if the public has a reason for keeping a public easement, that they should name what that reason is, name what the purpose is. Is it for an ATV trail? Is it for a hiking trail? Is it for a walking trail? Bicycle trail, horseback trail, whatever. Is it for access to a boat launch? Is it for access to public land and there are going to be people driving in and out all the time? If the public says what their purpose is for keeping that as a public easement and then maintains it for that purpose, then the person who needs that road for access to their own home isn't going to be damaged because that public use is going to be supported. It's similar to where you have a road association and each person contributes their fair share of the maintenance because of the use that they're making of the road. Lots of cases we've seen where there is a private road association, but there is a piece of public land on that road. And the town will say, oh, well, because we're the town, we're immune, we don't have to pay road association fees.
The county of Aroostook doesn't do that. I can tell you, we pay our road dues for certain places.
And before we get John's comment, one thing I'd point out though is that you may say that you're retaining a public easement for a particular purpose that exists today, but nothing's static. And the home, somebody may build a home on that road, even though right now it's really only being used for Forest Service or if it's being used for snowmobile trails. And so the concept needs to, I think, also take into account future changes in the use of the road and how it might adapt to that. John?
Yeah, you kind of hit on what I was going at, and I just going to ask Roberta about it. But in the instances that she's seen and dealt with, the one that she's kind of angling with, it looks like Aaron sure sounds like maybe 3 or 4 owners all own the land around, and it kind of dead ends. But in many of the town discontinued roads for trail systems, both ATV and snowmobile, there is access and throughways to lakes and ponds and stuff. Do you see a number of those different situations, or do you have a percentage that you would say, hey, if we could just get a small 4-person group together, this would solve this problem, but we can't because of the way laws are written? Or do you see it as this is inevitably going to keep going until we reinvent the wheel? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Are you talking about dead end roads as opposed to through roads?
I guess from the town's perspective, they abandoned a road and there was a farm and there was a mill and what have you. So the landowners are butted now. If the 4 of them got together, they could make a little road association. They'd be happy, convert it to private. The snowmobile trail where the boys' son used to ride up and down the road will now be eliminated, but it would eliminate any people putting gates up because the 4 people have got an agreement and they may even allow the kid to ride. That's irrelevant. But what I'm curious at is these situations, do you have a vision of, and these 10 people that have approached me, if they could just make road associations for them, their groups, it would eliminate all the trouble of somebody throwing a gate up instead of what percentage of dead end roads, I guess, are you looking at as opposed to thoroughfares where there actually is recreational opportunities for these people?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't looked at what the percentages are. I know in a lot of cases, there's a road that used to be a through road that's been discontinued, and now a piece of the road on each end is maintained by the private landowners. And where you get a problem is where there are people that are using it as a through road who don't have any real business being there, you know, as far as, you know, owning property on the road. And this is where you get the mud runner going through at 2 o'clock in the morning at the height of mud season. Or where you get, as we've seen on our place, a tractor trailer truck at 6 o'clock in the morning, thinking that GPS tells him this is going to be the shortest route to the campground he's trying to get to on the other side of town. And you have to go out and help him back up for 1/4 of a mile to get to a place where he can turn around and go back the way he came, because there's no way he's going to make it up over the hill. So as far as percentages, I would have to really look into that. I think a lot of these, the ones that are problems, are the ones that were through roads. And a snowmobile trail on an old through road, as I said, probably isn't much of a problem, except if the road is being plowed, and then, you know, there needs to be proper signage. Maybe the snowmobile trail can be put alongside the plowed way. And there are other options that might be looked at there. ATV trails, if there's an ATV club that is properly maintaining it, and again, if they can put in a trail that goes along the edge of the right of way instead of down the middle of it. Lots of these old roads, county ways were typically laid out as 66 feet wide. So there should be space where maybe something could be done like that, where they could be parallel rights. That may not solve all of them, but you know, we're not expecting to solve everything at once here. We're kind of chipping away at the edges.
Yep. No, thank you for the explanation. Just kind of how I envisioned it. I just would like to know a quantity if we're looking at 50, 100 cases of dead ends versus throughways.
Now, Roberta, you'd also looked in your group, well, in your research at 3022 and identified the problem we talked about earlier about public easement definition.
One thing that I had thought is that 3022 was a clarification of 3021 rather than conflicting with it. Up until you started discussing it with me, I wasn't seeing it as being one allows ATVs and the other doesn't. I was kind of thinking that, you know, 3021 says that we have private ways now that they're now called public easements, and then 3022 says what a public easement is. But
Don't quite have the
that's
same
not the way I
spin.
see it.
But it's an issue that has to get resolved. So we made a little progress, at least explaining it. With regard to 29A, 101, that's the motor vehicle definition, and that creates some of the mischief as to
Right.
these things that aren't motor vehicles.
And this says, as used in this title, not just the chapter, but the whole title. And it says private way means a way privately owned and maintained over which the owner may restrict use or passage. Great. That sounds good. And includes a discontinued way, even if the public recreation easement has been reserved.
So
Well-
what they really mean is private road up until they get about halfway through, and then it becomes a private way / public easement. Right?
So they've got two definitions within one definition. And again, how do you know which one you're going by?
Well, not only that, this one says that you can limit. And then others say you can't.
mhm. Which
The
is-
intent is to be able to allow all the motor vehicle operating related offenses. Whether it's a main mall parking lot that can be closed off, whether it's a logging road that is privately owned but has a recreational easement over it, whether it is a back parking lot, Oxford Plains Speedway, great newspaper article that was done about a melee at Oxford Plains Speedway. All that had to deal with or began with motor vehicle operation. So it is about the intent of that statute that defines what that is. And it has to be really simple for this purpose because you don't really want to be pulling out a law to figure out, or a map, or going even to the DOT to figure out, well, do I have the ability to enforce this operation on this road while you're sitting in a cruiser and dealing with that? So I think that's important to keep in mind as we're digging through this. It's not necessarily a conflict as it is a way of defining the ease for a law enforcement officer to apply this section of law.
That's exactly my point, and I will give you a prime example. This is, the one that I live with day to day. If it's privately owned and maintained and the owner may restrict use or passage, then under that basis, my husband was perfectly justified in going out and taking basically a tomato stake and sticking it in the middle of the road at the point where it's no longer maintained, that said private property, no trespassing.
But that's not the
Private way.
intent of this definition. This definition is to determine whether or not it says private way, which you'll see on a sign as you're driving down the road, which really means a private road, that operation can still be enforced on that road. It really wasn't to define that you can then block off all private ways. That's not the intent of the definition of this purpose. It's to make it easy for a law enforcement officer.
Says it says over which the owner may restrict use or passage. So now you're saying the owner can't restrict use or passage?
It is meant to be so that an officer can enforce. So Oxford Plains Speedway is a place where the owner can restrict passage, but there is a public purpose, a public access to that. So the operation that happens there that is in violation of this section can be enforced in the same way. So OUI, driving to endanger, all of those things that can happen in a large public space that is subject to gates and bars or can be closed off for this purpose is a privately owned space with a public purpose over it. So they're not dictating, and whether or not there's a private way sign at the end of your street that is a privately owned street, the operation can still be enforced. It's not about saying, okay, well, this is a private way, so now we can put up bars. It's about how the law enforcement officer knows, do I have the authority to enforce this section of law or do I not? Which needs to be very simple, and it needs to be in those places where it's quite obvious. You're going to see private way signs. You're going to see a public parking lot, both of which have large spaces in which you can operate. They're not necessarily owned, but there's a public reason there. They have to be able to go in and enforce.
So are you saying that they should be able to enforce the owner's right to block it or enforce the public's right to use it? Which?
Enforce the Title 29. This is
So-
all about
so
motor
which-
vehicle operations. This
so
is
which
not
are they-
about anything to do with the road itself. It's about their ability to enforce this section of law.
So
and
you're saying
defining
that
it.
private, so you're saying that private way here refers to something entirely different from private way in Title 23.
private way in this section is specifically to give them broad ability to apply Title 29 motor vehicle operations in a large variety of different spaces in which there will be motor vehicle traffic, which includes a whole mixture of ownership and a whole mixture of ability, whether that ownership and right is available from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., 12 p.m., closed off at the beach, gates are closed at a certain time. All of it has vehicles in common, operation in common, and potential violations in common.
Is anybody else confused?
So it gives them the right, gives my son the right to go in down there and write a guy for OUI. Whereas if it's truly private, and he has no public right to be there, then he can't enforce that. Under this law, it gives him the right to enforce that. They go into that, they can go into a Kmart parking lot with a drunk kid doing donuts and arrest him and charge him with OUI. Prior to that, that was unclear because he's on private land. And so is he?
Well,
That's what they're doing. Now, whether it takes it to where you're talking about or not, I don't know, but that's why they put the law on the books in 29A to just allow them to have complete ability to enforce, motor vehicle laws, OUI, whatever, loud noise, whatever it might be, on lands that could be deemed private,
So
but the
another,
public has access.
so in other words, private way as it's used here is a totally different thing than private way is defined.
I think every one of these, that's the reality. When they passed the law, to say what they were trying to accomplish at the time, and it was different legislative sessions, different legislative committees, different sections and titles of the law, and that's why we have all the conflict now, because they use those definitions without really stopping and thinking about how they interact with one another in different sections of the law.
So that term needs to be changed to something else. Or the chairman.
Well, it's interesting, because again, it goes back to my question, earlier here, we said private ways no longer exist, but yet we're still talking about private ways, so something's, I don't think we can say they don't exist. Because the law still got them in there. Now, maybe they should be all clarified differently. I don't know.
Well, I think the issue's been raised and some suggestions have been put out there.
one thing.
Parking lot at Kmart's not gonna get a public easement, right?
Well, it's going to be considered that potentially.
Well, one of the things you're talking about here is access and the other is enforcement, and it seemed like people were concerned about the police being able to interject or, enforce rules. And the other thing is does the owner in fact, or somebody in fact, are they actually able to restrict just indiscriminately? So I think that's the big need of clarification is that.
Where this becomes problematic is where you have a dispute between two people, one who wants to use the road and one who doesn't want them using the road. And you call in law enforcement and they don't know which definition to go by. So they don't know whether to side with the person that's blocking the road or whether to side with the person that wants to be able to go through. And as a result, they say it's a civil matter, you'll have to take it to court to figure out which one it is. And you get two frustrated landowners who are arguing with each other and the court won't do anything for them, or they can't access the court because it's too expensive, and the police won't do anything for them, and they end up shooting at each other. And we've seen more weapons used against people because they just get frustrated because nobody knows what it means. Okay, moving on to the next one. Again, Title 29A. Section 2053, for the purposes of this subsection. So you have one definition that covers the whole title, and yet you've got a subsection that says something else. This statute itself defines private way as follows. For the purposes of this subsection, private way means any way or road access onto a public way, including an alley, driveway, or entrance. The fact that it refers to some means of access onto a public way implies that a private way intends something that is not public. Why have a definition for one subject, for one subsection that's different from the definition for the whole title? So again, here's.
Not the first time we see that though.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, those are the ones that are most problematic. The rest of them, it's, in most cases, it's pretty clear whether private way means a private road or private way means a public easement. Either because it will say, you know, going from a public road to a private way, that means a public way and a private way are two different things. So the private way is private, not public. And in other cases, it will say county way, town way, or private way, and that would refer to it being a public easement. So as I said, most of these are not problematic. You do get down to Title 23, Section 3101, which you mentioned, Jim.
right.
And the main issue there is the name of the Private Ways Act, that whole section there, or chapter, I guess it is. And the way that this got to where it is that you go way back to the historic private ways, where it was laid out for the landowner. If there were several landowners on that dead end, they could get together and maintain the road. But the wording of it said that when 4 or more people are owners and occupants of the way, they can get together and form a road association. Well, if it's a public easement, they don't own it. So there are no owners of a private way, meaning a public easement. So the legislature was about to repeal this whole chunk of laws because they were useless. There wasn't anybody that could actually put it to use. And a bunch of the lake associations got together and they said, you know, we've got a road association. This law works for us, except that it's, you know, it refers to something else. It doesn't refer to our private roads. And so the intent was to change it so that would apply to privately owned roads. And what they did was they changed the wording so that instead of saying our owners and occupants of the private way, they said land that is benefited by the private way. And that allowed them to use it for lake associations and that sort of thing. The problem was that they kept the term Private Ways Act. What they should have done was changed it to say Private Roads Act. And eventually they did add in private roads. So now it says private roads and private ways. But then things get more complicated because if you go down to Section 3105A, use of town equipment, there have been a lot of private roads where they have gotten a loophole to allow the town to plow that private road. Historically, there were a lot of towns that just plowed all their private roads because half the town is private roads and these are taxpayers, they're citizens, and as a courtesy to these people, they plowed their roads for them. And then the Maine Supreme Court came along and said, you can't use that because that's using public equipment to benefit the private individuals. So they found this loophole that says that if it's for fire and police protection, that gives a public purpose. So you can use town equipment for the purpose of keeping that access open as a fire lane.
Never
But-
my advice, but there you go.
But the catch to it is that you have to designate it as a public easement. So now you have private roads that are also public easements. And then what they did to try to straighten that out was that they put a definition into Section 3101 at the beginning of this chunk of statutes here. That defines a private way as being a public easement. So it just sort of confuses the whole thing because you have the title on it that says it's the Private Ways Act. You start off and it says a private way is a public easement. But then most of this is all about maintaining private roads. And I've actually had people come to me and say, well, we can't use that statute because we're not a public easement. We're not a private way. And I said, no, you can still form a road association because you are a private road. This applies to private roads primarily. The private ways are secondary.
All right, so those are, and those are all common issues, and that's something we just have to work through. private roads, what are the big issues briefly? Roberta?
Okay, private roads. We're moving on to the next handout here. Which is entitled Notes on Westlaw Search for Private Road, sorted by sequence and urgency. And what I did was first I went through all the Westlaw searches and I just sorted them by title and, you know, put them all in order. And then I went back through and I pulled out the ones that I thought were really problematic. Which again have to do with definitions in a lot of cases. So the first one, operation of a snowmobile. The phrase plowed private road or public road plowed privately implies privately owned roads and either public easements or townways that are closed to winter maintenance. Although the public generally does not give permission for the latter to be plowed privately, which is a problem when towns close a road somebody lives on. This is another issue that we get into is roads that are closed to winter maintenance when somebody still lives on it. Which is basically a functional discontinuance for the winter months. The statute on closing roads to winter maintenance says that the town should take into account population. And I think what that was intended to mean was that if anybody lives there, you need to keep the road plowed, because there are other statutes that have to do with the town's responsibility to plow its roads. But a lot of towns have said, well, you know, there's only a couple of houses and they're way out there. It's not worth our while to plow this whole road just for that person. So they close the road to winter maintenance. And then they say, well, because it's a public road, you can't plow it privately. And so now the person has no access to their home during the winter. Anyway.
You also mentioned the snowmobiles on closed roads here, so we don't need to go over that again, but
Yeah.
you've got that, yeah. Operation of ATVs.
Okay, the statute does not contain the term private road. It was amended in 2015 to repeal subsection 5, which formerly prohibited operating an ATV on a private road after having been forbidden to do so by the owner's agent or municipal officer or by conspicuously posted signs. So since they repealed that, does that mean that the owner of a private road can no longer prohibit ATVs? Or does it mean that ATVs are completely prohibited because subsection 1A says a person may not operate an ATV on the land of another without the permission of the landowner or lessee? So does that private road mean that because it's a private road, that's a place where the ATV cannot operate? Or does the section that they repealed mean that the private landowner can no longer prohibit ATVs?
So when it was changed because the law said that you had to have landowner permission to operate an ATV.
Okay, so
If you're operating on a designated ATV trail, that can only happen if landowner permission has been acquired. And that was the intent, was to say, it's a private road, you have to have landowner permission, you don't have any authorization to use it otherwise.
okay, so the answer is that if the landowner gives permission, then the ATVs can operate on it,
Correct.
but otherwise they can't.
Because that's
Okay, that
like
can be
all
clarified, I
paper
think.
company roads, whatever, that's,
Mhm.
we gotta have their permission.
Mhm. Okay, then the next one, Title 23, Section 1903. We got into this definition in the other one, I think.
Right, the travel information
Private
services.
road or driveway or a public easement. Responsibility for cost of repairs to and maintenance of private roads that benefit residential properties. This one has been a real problem. The intent of it was good. The intent was that when somebody goes to get a loan on a piece of property, the mortgage company wants to be assured that that property is going to remain accessible, especially a residential property. And so they tried to take a statute from another state and just kind of move it over to Maine, and it didn't work because Maine's laws are different. And it was going to mess up too many things. So we worked really hard. I worked with the Realtors Association and various other interested parties that were there. And we thought we had it figured out, but it got messed up again. One of the things that was wrong with it initially was that it was going to include private ways. And I said, you don't want to touch private ways. There are too many issues with that. So make it just private roads. And then they said that, initially they said that only the residential property owners had to share in the maintenance. And I said, you can't do that, because if you've got two residential property owners and a logger, and the logger is coming in and out during mud season, hauling his wood out and leaving a mess. If you're making it only apply to the residential property owners, they've got to build a road for the logger. That's not fair. So they said, okay, we'll change it. We'll say that all the property owners share in the maintenance. Fine. But then they unchanged another piece of it when it comes down to the enforcement. They said in the enforcement that a residential property owner has a right to sue another residential property owner to recover if they don't pay their dues. So you get somebody who's got, and I shouldn't just pick on loggers because they're responsible loggers too. But I know one road that has a stone quarry on it and a lumber mill, and neither of them is contributing to maintenance, and they expect the one resident to maintain the whole road for them. Another problem with this is that the default position, it says that each property owner who shares a common benefit is responsible for a share of the cost of reasonable and necessary repairs to and maintenance of the private road. If there is any existing road association, that preempts this. If there's even any verbal agreement that, you know, this is how this road is maintained, that will still remain. But the default position, if there is no road association, is that it's assumed that all the property owners share equally. So what's been happening is that the realtor asks the seller who maintains this road, and the seller says, oh, it's a private road and the maintenance is shared by the abutters. Well, the seller has an interest in selling his property. And sometimes the seller may say that when it isn't true. Sometimes the seller doesn't know, because a lot of these cases, it's really hard to tell what the status of the road is. They may think it's a private road, but actually it's a public easement. Two cases that I've seen come up under this, actually 3 cases now, I think. In one case, the seller said that it was a private road with shared maintenance. It turns out part of it is a private road and part of it is a public easement. And the public easement everybody uses and nobody has any intent to maintain it. The part that's a private road, the landowners are the resident and a Boy Scout camp that hasn't visited their land in at least 10 years. And they have no interest in maintaining the road. And a logger who has finished his logging operation has no interest in coming back to do anything for the road. And the town claims immunity from any responsibility. So this guy was told that there's shared maintenance, but he shares it with 3 other entities that aren't going to do anything. Another case, the buyer was told that it was a private road with shared maintenance. It turns out it isn't a private road. It was discontinued without easement years ago. And for several decades, all the property owners, residents, each chipped in and maintained the road. There wasn't a problem. And then somebody new moved in and then bought property on both sides of the road and claims that because they own both sides of the road, they can control access. And anytime they feel like it, they lock the gate. And there's nothing the other property owners can do because it's private property. It's not a private road. They're trying to get their title insurance company to grant them an easement by prescription because the property that they bought has used that road for access for decades. But it means going to court. Then there's the situation that you've heard a few people come in and testify where they were told that it was a private road with shared maintenance. And now one of the other landowners, again, has bought property on both sides of the road and claims that they own the whole road and they can put up a gate. So this statute is not working well. It needs to have some things sorted out. It has promise if it could be made to work, but as it is now, it's not working. Title 29A, section 2053. Private to public intersection. This contains a definition. It says for purposes of this subsection, private way means any way or road access onto a public way, including an alley, driveway, or entrance. The fact that it refers to an entry onto a public way indicates that it intends entry from something other than a public way, in other words, a private road. But the cases that are cited all refer to entry from private roads, not private ways. So basically what it needs to have done is to just change the term to say private road, not private way. Disclosures. Here again, we thought that the property disclosures were going to be a grand solution. They have helped some. I used to get calls from people on a regular basis saying, I just bought this piece of property and now I'm told that the road is discontinued. What does that mean? And I'm like, oh no, wish you'd called me last week before you bought the property. So now I'm getting calls from people saying, I'm looking at a piece of property and it says it's on a discontinued road. What does that mean? Well, that's a big improvement. The problem is that let's see, let me read what it says here. 2019 amendment repealed the subsections that contain the term private road. However, the use of the phrase any means other than a public way includes private roads. The trouble is realtors depend on the seller to tell them the legal status of the road, and often the information the realtor is given is inaccurate. So again, here's the same kind of thing you run into on the responsibility for cost of repairs and maintenance of private roads. Is that finding out what the status of the road is difficult. And as a result, sometimes the information is not accurate. Here's where if we can get a really good database going through the DOT, maybe we can require that the realtor check not only with the landowner, but also with the DOT and see if we can pin down the accurate status of the road.
Yeah, at least that way they'll know who's responsible, who's maintaining the road. Whether it's publicly maintained or not,
Right.
right?
But the problem is if it's not publicly maintained, then who is responsible?
Well,
If anybody.
that's another level of inquiry, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that the rest get us to the disclosures in 3101 to 3106 get us through the issues we've raised and discussed already.
Yeah. Some of the cases are interesting. And a lot of that goes into the old cases from the 1800s having a different understanding of the private way. And again, I kind of got into the evolution of that.
Okay.
As to how originally they were thought to be basically private roads and now they're thought to be public.
At the same time, the priority subcommittee was meeting, and we have some materials that have been put together by the priorities subcommittee. And Carla, do you want to take us through that?
Actually, Roberta was gonna do that.
Okay, I didn't want to leave anyone out.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I offered to let her do it. People are gonna get tired of hearing me speak, I'm afraid.
But you were so generous in putting this all together, so I can.
Just before she gets into that, if we want to take a quick break.
Sure. Let's take 5. Is that a lot to? All right, maybe 6 if we're generous.
Some of them are starting to change color, and then some of them, like you said, they're literally falling off the ground.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is bizarre.
I read that might be mold.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. I'm surprised the whole state is that
Right.
mold,
I don't think I've ever seen such a humid summer.
Right.
given the amount of rain that we've had.
Yeah. Well, let's get back on the record, or back to meeting. And Roberta's going to deliver the report of the priority subcommittee. Let me suggest this. What we're really looking for today is trying to get an idea of what the problems are. And let's understand the problems, and then maybe the next meeting will be focusing more on potential solutions to the problems that have been identified. But so Roberta, particularly from the problem perspective, what did the priority subcommittee think?
Okay. The main issues to work on, we tried to narrow it down to a few that we figured were the most important ones. So I'm gonna let you read the preamble here at your own leisure, but the issues to work on. Limited liability and maintaining the road where there is a public easement. And if the town closes the road in the winter, the person there would still be able to plow the road. What often happens on these roads is when they do close the road to winter maintenance and somebody lives there, then they tell a person, you can't plow it either. Because of liability issues. And then,
Yeah, two different issues there, though. Let's because when a town closes a way to winter maintenance, it's a town way
right.
that the town is responsible to maintain.
Mhm.
And if the town messes up in maintaining it, it's liable under the Highway Defect Act for a pothole or somebody's
Yeah, and I
property
heard that
damage or
for-
personal injury. That's a little bit different from a public easement where the town has the right but not the obligation, and there's no liability for maintaining it.
Yeah.
So, just,
But if the
okay,
landowner maintains it, then the question is the landowner liable? Is he
Right.
affected or-
that's something we talked about early on. Okay,
Okay, second, all abandoned roads will be deemed abandoned with a public easement retained if people would be landlocked. The abandonment statute right now doesn't make that clear. And as a matter of fact, yesterday I was in a hearing before the Franklin County Commissioners where there was a piece of road that was going to be abandoned. This is where they thought they had discontinued a certain piece of the road years ago, but it was unclear where the ending point was. And they've been stopping maintenance at one point when they should have been continuing a little bit further with it. So there's this section between two branches of the brook that was kind of in limbo. And one of the landowners was really kind of in a panic because the notice that went out said that the county commissioners get to choose whether or not to keep a public easement. And he was afraid that if they extinguish the easement, that he's got no access. And they said, oh, yes, don't worry, we're keeping an easement. But it's not clear in the law. It just says that the municipality or county can decide whether or not to keep public easement. And it doesn't say that if somebody will be landlocked, that they have to keep it. So that'd be a fairly easy fix. A couple of other things that need to be tweaked on the abandonment law. People should have more time to request a hearing. Somebody on the subcommittee suggested 6 months. I don't know if it needs to be that long, but it needs to be longer than what they have now anyway. And the request for a public hearing of the landowners should be smaller than 25%. If anybody is going to be left with no road, they should be able to ask for a hearing on it. And on 3026A, clarify the statute that this statute can be used to extinguish a townway or a public easement by the private granting of easements on these roads, so no one is landlocked. It does say that it's for discontinuance of townways or public easements, but the public easements part kind of isn't emphasized. I think that can be made clearer. Consider minimum maintenance roads as tied to taxes. The red that should be deleted from it. Perhaps funded by the increase in property tax revenue when land changes from undeveloped land to residential property. And this was brought up by somebody else that happened to be at the county commissioners hearing yesterday. I think I will get into that a little bit further. Discontinuing allowing gates on any access roads, no one should be obstructed. And this should be a law for even when the court is determining who should have road access. Additional issues, alternate dispute resolution. How can this be made more available for those who can't afford to go to court? The Maine Agricultural Mediation Program already is doing some mediation work with discontinued roads. And family and community mediation, I've mentioned it to them. They sounded interested. They want to know more what it's about and whether they could have a discussion with us about whether that's something they can cover. And would it be possible to get a funded position to catalog townwide discontinuances from town meeting warrants? Back in the late 1970s or early 1980s, the DOT did a project where they went to all the county record books, the county commissioners' hearings. And they made a catalog of all the discontinuances that came up in the county meetings. And that's used on the main DOT map here. There's also a whole printout that I've got a copy of, and each of the registries of deeds has a copy of it. That you can go to it and find out if a road was ever discontinued by the county, which is great for county roads. But the question is, could we do the same thing for towns? It's going to be a bit more awkward because instead of having 16 counties, you've got all these towns. But it would mean going through annual reports. I've done some of them at the state library. The state library has an excellent collection of annual town reports. And if it just means somebody going through and noting down every place that's an article to discontinue a road and noting down basically the book and page number, you know, the year and the article number on the warrant, and just making a catalog of them. And then if one of these comes up, you can say, well, look, this one's been flagged. Let's go and see what it says, see what it means, see whether the discontinuance was done properly, how much of the road was discontinued. You can look up the details once you've got that book and page number. Okay, now going into a little detail on each of these. Limited landowner liability. I'm almost thinking this is not the same copy as the one that I have. I'm not sure here.
If you end up doing that and you'd have a position like that, for sure, I'm sure right up front, you'd have to develop what format that things are going to be kept so you can have an efficient database from it, for sure.
It would be Pete's shoebox.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody should be comfortable with that, I'm sure.
One of the things that I tried doing recently was over the years, when somebody's gotten in touch with me and said, well, you know, the town says the road was discontinued, but they can't produce a record of it. I'll go to the state library and I'll just go through all the town reports one after another, noting down each time when I find something that's a discontinuance, whether or not it's the road I'm looking for. I just note them all down. And I've been wondering how to catalog these things because they're all in my hand scratching. And it occurred to me, why can't I do basically what the DOT listing of county roads does, where it just has year, book, and page. And you know what county, and then the book and page and the year. And so I tried playing with that a little bit, and yeah, it does make something that you could then go back to the books and look it up and find out what the whole record is. So that'd be a simple format to put it in.
Yeah, you could put it in Excel ideally and be consistent with it, and then you can search.
Somebody's gonna have to teach me how to use Excel, and I'm gonna have to get a new computer.
I would volunteer to help you for sure on that. We could do a Zoom between each other sometime, would help for sure.
Thank you. And I'm finding that the one that I sent you is not the version that I was going to go by, so I'm going to grab mine. I apologize if it doesn't exactly follow yours. Under limited landowner liability, we could use Title 14, Section 159A, limited liability for recreational or harvesting activities, and maybe Title 7, Section 4103A, which is limited liability for equine activities. We can use those as a model for coming up with legislation to protect landowners who provide maintenance for a public easement, or who provide snow removal on a road that's closed to winter maintenance. One of the things that I thought of is, what's the possibility of having a sign that you can post at the beginning of the road that says this way not maintained for public use, not maintained at public expense, or you know, whatever is an appropriate wording for it. Use at your own risk. That doesn't absolutely guarantee immunity from liability, but at least warns people. Provides, you know,
Some towns
protection.
Some towns do that. Usually when there becomes an issue on that road.
I think that would be one simple thing that could be done, and having some legislation that gives them some liability protection. And then let's see, oh yeah, there was, the other issue that came up at that county commissioners hearing that I was at yesterday. A couple was looking at a piece of property, they were told, currently that road is closed to winter maintenance, but it's a simple formality, you just go to the county and ask them to reverse that, and they can lift the winter closing, which under the law they can do, but they're not required to. And the people made a good point. They said, when we move in here, we're going to be building a house. We're going to be taking this piece of property that was undeveloped land, so you weren't getting much tax revenue off of it. And when we build a house, we're going to be paying a whole lot more in taxes. We're also going to be using town facilities and, patronizing the local businesses, and we're going to bring more revenue into the town. And so why can't you take some of that increased tax revenue and put it into what it would cost you to plow the road? It's not going to cost a whole lot to plow a quarter of a mile of road. I'm sure our taxes are going to go up enough to cover that. And it sounded like a great idea. Except that then, I think it was their road commissioner who stood up and said, yeah, I've looked at that road and it's not in a condition where we could plow it. We would have to improve the road before we could plow it. And that's going to cost a whole lot more than the increased tax revenue. And then the clerk spoke up and she said, I've looked into the history on that road, and it appears it's not closed to winter maintenance. It never was open to winter maintenance. We have never plowed that road. So, here you get these people that's, they thought they'd done their due diligence on it. They thought they knew what they were getting into.
And that's why you can't get a realtor to sign a disclosure statement. Nobody knows on some of these.
Really?
So who told them they could go to the county commissioners and the county commissioners could just,
The seller.
oh, the seller? Oh, yes.
Of course. Which it wasn't real.
I know it was the seller, not the realtor. If it was the realtor, then it was the seller who told them that.
Mhm.
Okay, a couple of things that I'm intrigued by here. We already have Title 23, Section 3651, failure to provide safety and convenience, which says that highways, townways, and streets legally established shall be open and kept in repair so as to be safe and convenient for travelers with motor vehicles. In default thereof, those liable may be indicted, convicted, and a reasonable fine imposed therefore. And we also have Title 23, Section 3201, removal required damages, which says that when any ways are blocked or encumbered with snow, the road commissioner shall forthwith cause so much of it to be removed or trodden down. Tells you how old that law is, as will render them passable. So if we have these two statutes, is it even legal for a town to abandon a road? Because they're required to keep their roads safe and convenient and to keep them plowed. Is it legal for a town to close a road to winter maintenance?
Yes, there's a separate statute. There's a separate statute for that.
But can one statute override the other statute?
Well, it's
Should
notwithstanding
it say in here, except in exceptions?
well, that's how it's operated.
Yeah, the only way to get to what you're saying is challenge it and go to court and, get an opinion, I guess.
At the very least, winter closing of a road should be prohibited if anyone still lives on it year round. And one thing that Kathy Netto brought up is, she said if there's a CMP line on the road, then the road has to be kept open so that CMP can service its lines. We're not quite as vulnerable as Hawaii, but we saw what happened there when the lines went down.
Roberta, I hear what you're saying, like, they shouldn't close a road if somebody's still living on it. But what if they've been closing the road consistently and someone comes in and builds with the intention of, I just want to be here in the summer? And then,
They sell and somebody who's a COVID refugee from New York says, hey, I like it here. I'm staying here.
That's a different situation. That I think should be in the real estate disclosures, that they have to tell them that the road isn't plowed in the winter. And that there's no guarantee that it will be plowed in the winter. They can't assume that it's going to be reopened. But I do think in that case that the private landowners should be allowed to plow it themselves, but they should be provided with some liability protection. And again, the town can post a sign saying, use at your own risk. Okay, abandonment. When Kathy Netter presented the legislation a few years back to rewrite the abandonment statute, she really wanted to repeal abandonment, and we realized that wasn't gonna fly. So, Swam of Maine Woodlands, they recommended to her, we need to get something through here. So rather than trying to repeal it and having it not work, let's amend the statute. And there is a few good things in it. Now there is at least notice and hearing, which is a big improvement. Before it could be done and nobody would know about it. But there are a few flaws in it, one of them being that it doesn't specify that they have to keep a public easement if anyone would otherwise be landlocked. It sounds like they can just say, oh, there's no easement anymore. There needs to be more time for somebody to request a hearing, and there needs to be more time to apply or to prepare for a hearing. I know one case a few years ago where there was a road that was going to be abandoned. And the town was pretty good about at least notifying the landowners, and did give them some time to prepare. And in a lot of these cases, some of the landowners live out of state. It can take a while to contact them. It can take even longer to explain to them what's happening and convince them that this is something you're interested in, because you could lose access if you don't respond. And then how do you get 25% of them to agree when there's only one resident and the rest are woodlots? So if anybody objects, that should be sufficient to require a hearing. And then they should have time to prepare for it. And preparing for it means however much time it takes to figure out what the road is, figure out the history of the road, figure out whether it's actually been maintained during the last 30 years or not. This one that I was just mentioning, where they did give a hearing, I kind of came running in at the last minute and handed the landowner the email that I'd gotten from Pete saying they collected LRAP funding on this road up until 12 years ago. And so we walked into the selectmen's meeting and they said, oh, no, we're not taking any more testimony today. We've already decided. So that was under the old 3028, I think, but the new one, you know, it needs to give more time for preparing for a hearing.
How much?
I'd say maybe 60 days. I think 6 months is probably more than necessary. Another thing that needs to be tweaked under the abandonment statute is that it gives towns or counties the power to abandon town ways. A county can't abandon a town way. That's the town's jurisdiction. And it doesn't say anywhere in the statute that a county can abandon a county way. And that should be in there. So that'd be a simple matter of just going through it every place where it says a town way, just add town or county way. And again, where it says that they can vote on whether a public easement is retained or not, it should be required if it's going to leave anybody landlocked if they don't. Oh, under the current law, it says that they can collect state funding, which they'd be referring to the LRAP funding, the Local Road Assistance Program. They can collect that for 84 months and still claim abandonment. Now, I understand that just because they've claimed that road is being maintained doesn't mean that that LRAP money goes into that road. So that doesn't necessarily prove that they have maintained the road. But what it does prove is that they've been collecting money based on a claim that they're maintaining the road. So towns are supposed to update their records with the DOT every couple of years, aren't they?
No, not at all.
They're not. Wouldn't it be helpful if they did though?
We do that now I do that now as part of my job periodically, and no, it's no required updating.
You still send the form though, Pete, that like gives them the option to update if they want to? Didn't we used to be able to like cross off or add?
Yeah, that stopped in 2009.
That's how old I am.
So now they can claim that they're maintaining the road when they're not and get extra funding.
Possibly, or the other way around. where they haven't told us they've accepted a subdivision that they've been maintaining for 10 years and we haven't been paying them. So it works both ways. But that's, usually those things are very minor and the dollar amount is negligible. You know, we're gonna, just because of a mistake or an oversight, because of a changing board of selectmen, does that mean that the $26 that I paid them extra every year, that we're gonna go back and get that? No, not at all. Not even worth the time, because it works both ways
Is it a per mile amount
for a lane mile.
or lane
Yeah.
mile? And how much is it these days?
$1,200 a lane, $600 a lane mile.
600 a lane mile.
It still seems like allowing them 84 months is excessive, though. When the abandonment statute was first put through in 1976, it was very clear in the legislative discussion on the bill that if there was anything done to the road during the 30 years, it was not eligible for abandonment. And a few years later, they amended that to say that isolated acts of maintenance didn't count.
But that was always there. The
Hmm?
isolated acts
No, it
language.
wasn't always there. It was not, because I know our road was under the original version. And they added the isolated acts of maintenance.
Maybe after
Yeah.
74, but it was in there. I know it was in there by 80, 85 or so.
Yeah, that could be, but
Yeah.
it wasn't there in 1976.
And there's been a lot of litigation over what is an isolated act of maintenance.
Because there's no definition of it.
Right.
So some towns will say, well, we only grade it every year. That's isolated acts of maintenance.
Yeah. See Earwood versus town of Kennebunk. Yeah. Okay, so we've got that, those sets of issues on
Okay.
discontinuance and abandonment. What about for discontinuance issues?
Okay, discontinuance. If any property is left legally landlocked, a public easement must be retained. And then the way it's worded now, they have to give the abutters a year in which to see if they can sort out private easements. But that doesn't really work for a few reasons. In one case, I saw where there was a town where all the abutters had already agreed before it even went to a vote. But because they had to wait a year, they put them off and the agreements kind of disintegrated. Also, you can have the landowners go to only the work of hashing out these agreements and, getting deeds drawn up, ready to file. And it still has to go to a vote of the town, and the town can vote, no, we're not gonna let you have a private easement, we're gonna keep the public easement. So all that effort is wasted. Back when they wrote that into the law, I remember there was the argument that, well, you have to give the town the ability to vote on it because of home rule. Well, home rule doesn't say you can do anything you want. There are certain restrictions on home rule. In fact, under the Constitution, it only says that home rule allows you to do two things. It allows you to choose your form of government and it allows you to purchase land for development. But home rule has been taken to mean a whole lot more than that. But basically, if the landowners want it to be private, why can't they make it private? Why does the town have to have the say in whether or not it's private or not? If there is public land on that road that they need access to, then okay, but make the town be one of the members of the road association so that they have to contribute their fair amount of maintenance. So what I suggest for wording here is if any property will be left legally landlocked, a public easement must be retained, except that at any time the abutting landowners may negotiate shared private easement over the road or any inner portion thereof. What I mean by that is if you can't get the first two people on the road to agree, but everybody that's further in agrees, then let them discontinue the piece that's further in. Let's see, upon such successful negotiation, the public easement must be extinguished unless the way provides access to public land or water, in which case the municipality must define the extent and purpose of public use of the road and must be a paying member of any road association formed and contribute its fair share to the cost of maintenance. Another issue that was brought up at the subcommittee meeting was how can we put teeth into excluding public travel on roads that have been made private? Can you post signs? Can you put up a gate? Can you work with local law enforcement so they know what they can enforce? Can you post trail cameras? Because you're just saying that the road is private now isn't necessarily going to stop people who have used it for years or think that it's still their hunting grounds or whatever.
What do you do, Roberta, with utilities though, if the road is, you know, you say let the landowners let it go back to private and work out their own easements to access their property, what do you do with utility easements for phone and electricity and, you know, how do you let those companies still access that to maintain their wires and all of that stuff?
You know, there should still be a utility. easement.
There are statutes that retain a utility easement. for
Regardless,
existing
if you have,
utilities.
if you discontinued.
Yeah, even if you discontinue without a public easement. Then you're in the weird position of giving utility location permits though. But for the municipal officers, for something that's not a public way anymore. It's a little odd.
So they'll still get the municipality to sign off on the utilities, the utility permit?
Yeah, on
You still
our
get a
road,
location permit.
our road was kind of a sticky situation because back when David moved in, they were still doing the rural electrification project. And he could have gotten power into the house for minimal cost if the town had said that it was a public road. And he went to the town said, no, that's not our road, we have nothing to do with it. And then that program lapsed. And then years later, my mother was concerned because my parents were getting older. They wanted to be able to reach us if there was an emergency. And she said, well, look into how much it would cost for me to get a phone line in there for you. And David just kind of laughed and shook his head and said, you're not going to want to do that when you find out how much it costs. So we got in touch with the phone company and the guy came in and he said, well, is this a public road or isn't it? And we said, well, the town just took us to court to prove that they've got a public easement over it. Go ask the town. They went and asked the town. The town said, yeah, it's a public easement. Put in your utility line.
Oh, yeah.
So we got a phone, but no power.
And mail service.
What's that?
And mail service.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, minimum maintenance roads. The idea behind a minimum maintenance road is, well, currently in Maine, there are two options. You can either have a road brought to full town standard. And the state has recommended standards for what that should be with, you know, how many inches of substrate and surface gravel and paving and widths and crown and shoulders and the whole 9 yards. So it's rather an expensive proposition for a road that hasn't been kept up. Or the other alternative is you discontinue or abandon the road and you do nothing. And there's nothing in between. And we think there should be other options, and a lot of the Midwestern states have minimum maintenance roads where it's specified what the road is designed for and it's maintained just enough to support that use. So some suggested classes of roads would be logging roads. The logger to be responsible for leaving the road in no worse condition after a logging operation, which responsible loggers already do. Fire roads. Town would inspect at intervals and remove obstructions such as blowdowns, just to make sure you can get through there with an emergency vehicle if you have to. Farm roads, similar to logging roads, the farmer would be responsible for it. Industrial roads, roads used primarily for access to a business such as a lumberyard, quarry, mine, etc. Again, with the business having some responsibility for the condition of the road. Access to public land or water, the public to provide sufficient maintenance to support the designated public use. If you've got a boat landing, you need to keep the road good enough for going in and out of boat trailers. If it's a snowmobile trail, you just let the snowmobile club maintain it. Camp roads for summer only, that'd be the equivalent to the current townway summer. Low volume residential roads would have a gravel surface, maintenance to include at a minimum grading once or twice annually, and maybe gravel added to the worst spot. Should we just ask for grading to start as we're more likely to get it, or should we ask for more in the hope of at least getting grading? Funding to be derived from the increase in property taxes that results from property being converted from undeveloped land to residential property. How do we prevent a town from hiking the taxes to penalize a person for demanding maintenance of a road? What would be the formula? Whatever percentage of the town's tax revenue is spent on road maintenance, take that percentage or a designated fraction of that percentage for the increase and put it into the road that generated it. What we see happening here is, for example, on our road, On our end of the road, there was our camp, which had been lived in year round years and years ago. And then there were a whole bunch of woodlots. And when the woodlots had been cut off several times and there wasn't anything left that was worth cutting, they sold them off as house lots. Well, now all of a sudden, instead of having one huge lot that's in tree growth, you've got two smaller lots, each with a house on it, and each house is valued for, considerably more than that lot in tree growth. And the people are getting upset because they're paying taxes and they're getting practically nothing for it. Because they're not getting road maintenance. These are older couples that have no school-age children. We live so close to the Wayne town line that we almost invariably go out through Wayne. We don't even go through Fayette. So we're not even putting any stress on the town's roads. And we're using the Wayne businesses, the general store, the Wayne Library, Wayne Fire Department would get to us before the Fayette Fire Department does. So they take all this tax money that's being generated off of these houses on the road and it's all going somewhere else in town. We call it mining taxes because they know that if they grant a building permit for somebody to build on this road they don't have to maintain, they can get more tax money and use it someplace else in town. So what would be the problem with taking some percentage of that increased tax revenue when somebody moves in onto one of these roads and just using it to do minimal maintenance on it? One of the interesting things about other states that have minimal maintenance roads is that they do not allow a road to be converted to a minimal maintenance road if there's anybody living on it. Because there's the feeling that they have to provide access to those homes, they have to provide access for school bus, etc. But here in Maine, they're allowed to discontinue a road that still has more than one house on it and just stop doing maintenance entirely. Now, people that move into a road that's already discontinued, in most cases, they would be thrilled if they got anything. Now, come in and grade the road once a year. We've got a bad mud hole. Can you put a load of gravel in it? I know there's one selectman that we have very high respect for. Some people in her town came to her, a couple of older couples, and they said, look, we know that you don't usually maintain this road, but we're getting older. It's getting hard for us to keep up with it. There's a couple of really bad spots. Is there anything you can do for us? And the other selectmen were saying, well, it's a discontinued road. We have no responsibility. And this one selectman said, they are citizens of the town. They're, upstanding citizens. We owe them something. They're taxpayers. Let's just give them a couple loads of gravel. And they did. Solved the problem. Why can't we put in something in the law that allows that to be done?
Rebecca has.
I have a question too.
Rebecca?
First of all, the town can do that. There is already something in law. They can make that decision. It is based upon the people that are paying property taxes and what they commit to the budget. And they make that decision and they can do that. Municipalities cannot penalize somebody because they don't determine how to tax property. The state of Maine determines how to tax property. They determine what is assessed and how it is assessed. And residences on roads that don't have access are not assessed the same as other residences. The value of that property is based upon the building structure, the like buildings within that community, and all of that is dictated by the state. So there isn't any local control over or ability to penalize somebody or jack their taxes or even reduce their taxes other than what the state has determined and Maine Revenue Service allows. So that's a little bit of a problem, and the rest would require a constitutional amendment because highest and best use is how they have to maintain and make those decisions. You also can't separate taxes based upon what services you use. The courts have been really clear about that as well.
Okay, two comments I would have on that. One is that I know of people who have gone to their town and said, how are our taxes reduced because we're on a discontinued road? And they've said, oh no, we assess everybody the same no matter what kind of road they're on. And the other is, could you tell me what the statute is that allows a town to put in a load of gravel on a discontinued road?
You can go in and do minimum, you can go and do maintenance. What you pointed out and what you said about that particular selectman is them actually doing that. It's home rule. Home rule allows them to say, yes, we are going to appropriate these funds. We're not taking over maintenance. We're going to provide one-time access. We're going to help with that. And the rest of the town votes on the budget to appropriate those funds.
As long as it's a public purpose.
Correct.
And if that
So it has to have a
purpose-
public easement and they
Right.
can maintain that easement. Or they can
Right.
choose not to maintain that easement. But the important piece is that it doesn't need to be the $1 million a mile standard. And they can do that already.
It has to have a public easement, is that what you just said?
It has to have a public easement.
Right.
Okay, so there's the stickler to it. If it doesn't have a public easement, they can't do it currently.
Correct.
Right. That'd be
And-
unconstitutional.
And what we find in most cases is that even if there's a public easement, the town won't do it.
Well, that's a matter of discretion on the part of the voters.
Because years ago, we asked our town if they could come in and just do one pass with their wing plow in the winter, because it was a really bad winter and the road was getting narrower and narrower. And they said, sure, if they came in, they did one pass in, one pass out, we were all set for the rest of the winter. The following year, we asked them the same thing, and the administration had changed, and they said, no. And we said, well, what if we have a fire? And they said, oh, the snowplow will be in front of a fire truck.
Right.
A lot of good that's gonna do.
Well, yeah, okay,
And then we actually got it put on the warrant to say that because it's a public easement, that the town authorizes the selectmen to use town equipment on it. And because we showed up at the annual meeting, they voted no. And we showed up at the following year's annual meeting, article was on the warrant again, because we showed up, they voted no. The following year, we didn't bother. And somebody put it on the warrant again and it passed. So that winter we said, well, okay, now you've authorized it, when you come and do one pass with the plow. And they said, no, that's only when there's a fire.
so you started a fire.
It
Okay,
was tempting, but we didn't.
Steve, did you have a comment?
Yes, I was just thinking a while ago from a perspective of municipality and the expectations of them. Around here in northern Maine, there's a lot of, rural and potato farm and roads all over the place. So if somebody were to come up in the area, so somewhere in the concession, as they would say up here, concessions area, and build a house there, even if there's no winter access, for example, I don't think anybody should expect that just because they build a house there, there people are going to accommodate them as far as plowing to their place and setting, this sort of thing. So that's one of the concerns I would have, is that I do know a lot of people that live off a grid and stuff like that, and that's fine. But what the expectation of for emergency services and electricity and stuff like that, I think that has to be dealt with right up front. That has to be addressed rather than, somebody's building a home and then having expectations, for example.
The suggestion that we had made before, which didn't fly before the legislature, was that there would be 3 requirements. First, it would have to be a public easement. Second, the town would have had to grant a building permit. And third, they would have to tax that property as being a residential property. If those 3 things existed, then we would ask for that minimal maintenance. If the town doesn't grant a building permit, then there's the question of, if they refuse to grant a building permit, are they reducing the value of the property? So, is that going to require compensation? So our thought was, well, let them build in there without a building permit, and they are responsible for the consequences. If they don't put in proper septic and it pollutes the stream, they're going to be responsible for cleaning it up. But allow them to build, but they're on their own. They don't get maintenance because you haven't increased their taxes, you haven't granted them a building permit.
You'd say allow them to build without a building permit?
Mhm.
Allow them to build without a building permit?
what's wrong with letting somebody build? There's some towns that don't even require building permits. So if you got somebody who's way off.
It's
the
still tax,
woods,
but it's still taxable.
they wouldn't be taxed for residential property if you don't grant them a building permit. See, this is part of the deal that we were thinking.
Yeah, but you're talking changes to the constitution here at that point. This is outside of, because you're supposed to tax people, you're supposed to assess people the same as far as what they build. Maybe there's some devaluation that the assessor can draw on because there isn't a road access. Like I know in my case, I pay so much a foot less than what people on using a lake property
Some towns do that. other
because the
towns don't.
road itself is not town way, right?
But there are some towns that don't take up any discount if it's a discontinued road.
Okay,
So one last,
well, we're at about 4 o'clock,
Yeah.
a little
can I
after,
get in one last thing here?
real brief.
Prohibiting gates. We already have several statutes that should require the removal of gates, but currently law enforcement is unwilling to enforce the removal of gates unless a court has declared the legal status of the road. Is there a way to require that a gate be removed until the legal status of the road can be determined by a court or through mediation or arbitration? And the laws we already have, the abandonment statute has a provision for removal of obstructions. Title 12, section 9602, obstruction of discontinued woods roads prohibited. If there's a road that can be used for fire prevention, it's supposed to be left accessible. Title 17A, section 505, obstructing public ways. A way upon which the public has access as invitees or licensees. That would include a public easement. And obstructing public ways is a class E crime. Title 17, section 2802, miscellaneous nuisances. Includes obstructing or encumbering by fences, buildings, or otherwise of highways, private ways, streets, alleys, commons, common landing places, or burial grounds. So since we already have these statutes, why can't those be enforced to keep somebody from obstructing a discontinued road where somebody lives?
Yeah, some of those are for use by town, some of them by plaintiffs, some of them by DAs, and so we'll have to see and take a look at it. But what you can't do is force someone to take a gate out on a private road.
Yeah, we're not talking about
I
that.
understand. Okay,
I know Kathy wanted to say something. I don't know whether there's any time to.
we've really.
I told her there might not be time.
Yeah, we just don't have the time today. Normally, we try to have some
Sorry, Kathy.
public comment.
Okay.
It's simply, it's 5 after 4. We're supposed to close up shop at 4 o'clock. We have to schedule a meeting for next month. Do we want to do that here, or do we want to do that by doodle poll or some other means?
Doodle poll.
Doodle.
Okay, doodle poll wins. So we'll do that at that meeting. Well, today was to try to figure out what are the problems we see with regard to terms and with regard to our priorities. I think we've pretty well flushed out the problems. Now we get the hard part. What are some solutions? We've got to be brief and concise and figure out some potential solutions we can then develop, make part of our report and give to the legislature in 3 months. October, November, December, because January 4 is going to be, pretty quick to turn that report in.
Nobody wants to work over Christmas.
Nobody wants to work over the holidays.
Are you expecting that we'll actually present them with some proposed legislation, or is this going to be a summary report of what we think the solutions might be, or?
Well, it's a good question. I prefer proposed legislation because otherwise the legislature will want us to draft the legislation then. That's what happened last session. So let's see what we can do. Let's see though, let's craft concise solutions to the problems we've highlighted by committee to bring back to the next meeting. And then we'll see, are these things we're capable of doing drafting for? The ideal solution, again, of course, the Office of Policy and Legal Analysis, and we'll take a look at it and correct it and get it in perfect form. But at least if we get some of the drafting done, there's less mystery at the other end. How's that sound? All right. Anything else for today?
I still would like to know if anybody has any ideas on that last one about how you get law enforcement to use the laws we've already got to remove obstruction.
Well, maybe a recommendation there is training. Maybe it's training at the Criminal Justice Academy level if there are laws that are capable of being enforced.
Mhm.
And if they're not being enforced, though, let's find out why. Is it because they don't know how to apply them? That may be a problem.
Sometimes I think it's because they're not sure what status the road is in. And.
They need
you know,
MDOT's road
Does
guide.
the statute apply? Because
Right,
we don't know.
right. And that's,
In other cases, I think it's pretty clear that it could apply, but
well,
I don't know why they don't enforce them.
let's wait for some suggestions from you. And we'll talk about that next month. Are we, is a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All right, all in favor? I'm not gonna cry a roll call. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you for your patience. I know this was incredibly long.
Thank you, everybody, for your work.
Nicely
Yes.
done, folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the incredible amount of work that went into all of these. And thank you as well, Heather, for working so diligently on that. Getting us
Absolutely.
actual,
Yeah, great job.
we got a channel and we've got a website.
Mhm.
We're
Yeah.
moving into the 21st century.
And you guys can watch yourself whatever you want on the channel.
Oh, dear.
Pay Netflix. You guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.